Chapter 1. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Xia City after entering autumn was a nation of crows. This ugly yet intelligent creature was the true master of the city. They gathered in groups on the roadside trees, mocking the passers-by with their hoarse, monotonous voices. Wah wah, go and be unlucky. Occasionally they would even show off their superb flying skills under the spoke-shaped clouds in the sky. Most of the passers-by looked as if their parents had died. They stared at the black shadows circling in the sky with hatred in their eyes, as well as the strange cloud formation even higher up. Xia City's skies were covered by this sort of cloud and mist after entering the latter half of September. A total of 6 earthquakes of around magnitude 3, 3 earthquakes of magnitude 4, and 2 earthquakes of magnitude 5 occurred in less than a week. The magnitude and intensity of the earthquake had not yet reached the limit of the city's tolerance, but the fragile people's hearts were already shaken. More than half of the sound and electric waves shuttling through the air of Xia City were shouting with all their might. Earthquake clouds, earthquake clouds. In the era of civilization that was about to enter the 22nd century, this kind of folk science concept was openly spoken by various experts and scholars and appeared in the media. Luonan was more or less affected. When he got off the low-altitude bus with the black leather notebook that never left his side, the bracelet on his wrist vibrated. After the signal was connected, his aunt, Madame Luo Shuqing, said, "Let's go home tonight. Your uncle has already prepared dinner." Due to the frequent earthquakes in recent days, his aunt, who had allowed him to live independently, immediately tore up the agreement and repeatedly ordered him to go back to live with her so that he could take care of her. Luonan absolutely could not agree to this. He had painstakingly entered Acumen College. Wasn't it all for the sake of his days of independence and freedom? What's more, this was the most critical juncture. If they were delayed for even a day, who knew what the consequences would be? The problem was that Luonan had never been good with words. The reason he put forward didn't have the slightest bit of persuasiveness. The situation grew more and more rigid. He watched as his aunt reached out her hand from the phone and dragged him back. Luonan was having a headache when he received a message. He only skimmed through the gist of it before sighing inwardly at his good luck. He hastened to add more weight. Today I have to study. Tomorrow I have an interview with the society. Interview? Which club? The Mystical Arts Research Society. Mysticism? Luo Shuqing was a little suspicious. Soon she called out, "Moya Moya." Not long after, a slightly hoarse voice joined the call. It had a unique lazy tone. It was Luonan's older cousin Moya, who had just graduated from Acumen College last year. The Mystic Arts Research Society. I know. It said that they are very rich and the people inside are very willful. Luo Shuqing couldn't stand her daughter's attitude and immediately reprimanded her. "Speak properly." Amoya laughed. "No matter how well you put it, your biological son isn't doing well either. It's only been a month since school started and he's still in the interview. He's obviously not sociable. Acumen College is trying to merge East and West. Their Western way of thinking is very serious. There's no club life and they first cut off their credits. As for entering a higher school and finding a teacher, the recommendation letter from the school definitely won't have anything good to say." The explanation of adding fuel to the fire instantly ignited yet another mother-daughter battle. The focus of the conflict shifted, and Luonan, who was over 100 kilometers away, was able to escape unscathed. Luonan had been standing in his living room for nearly half an hour at this time. The sky was already dark, and the living room lights automatically lit up, casting his figure into the window of the high-rise apartment across the street. Luonan issued an order and the curtains automatically closed. But at this time, a black shadow passed through the closing curtains and landed on the open balcony. The shadow used its thick beak to push open the sliding door of the French window, and swaggered inside with an indescribable ease. This uninvited fellow was a typical bald crow. Aside from the base of its ash-white beak, its entire body was jet black. It looked sturdy and robust, and it was a size larger than other crows of the same species. Under the soft light, its feathers fluctuated between deep black and deep blue. The crow paced a few steps in the room before flapping its wings and leaping onto the coffee table in the living room. Then it leaned its body forward, and a sealed glass test tube the size of a thumb slid out from its thick beak. It landed on the coffee table and most of the tube was filled with white powder. The crow felt a lot more comfortable after spitting out the foreign substance in its throat. It cleared its throat in an ostentatious manner. Screech. Screech. Shut up. The crow's cry was a disaster within this enclosed space. Luo Nan berated it and took the test tube to wash. Then he took out a strip of cooked meat he had prepared and stuffed it in its mouth. Crows were quite easy to talk to despite being called ink. They ate very elegantly. It even used its wings to signal to Luo Nan to pour a cup of water for it. Dinner had been laid out on the dining table to the side. It perfectly conformed to the monotonous craftsmanship of a home AI. The color, smell, and taste were lackluster, but the most important thing was that the portion was ample. It was no problem for 3 to 5 people to fill their stomachs. Luo Nan displayed a superhuman appetite, and his speed was extremely fast. He finished at the same time as Ink. After Ink ate and drank its fill, it drilled out the sliding door of the French window in a straightforward manner. It flapped its wings and flew away. Luo Nan tidied up the cups and saucers. He was just about to go to the study when his wristband vibrated once more. This time the one who contacted him was his older cousin Emoya. She was carved out of the same mold as her mother. She also opened with a sentence, "How are you going to thank me this time?" Thanks sis. You don't even know how to change things up." Emoya knew that Luo Nan's tongue was clumsy, so she didn't tease him any longer. She directly cut to the chase. That Mystic Arts Research Society. Was it someone else's recommendation or did you take the initiative? I chose it myself. Do you know what kind of place it is? Luo Nan thought for a bit and gave a simple answer. It's half society and half research institute in nature. It's privately funded and its strength is robust. It has an extremely high degree of autonomy compared to the school. Emoya sneered, "It looks great, doesn't it?" Luo Nan didn't know how to respond for a time. Emoya reminded him, "That's a playground for the rich second generation. The core members form their own circle. They research a few bizarre things every day to pass the time. Students from ordinary families go there to do odd jobs. So it looks great, but it's only for that circle. It has nothing to do with academics or skills." Luo Nan interrupted Emoya's indoctrination. "You can do experiments there." Emoya dragged out her tone and went, "Oh," with a sigh. "It looks like your experiments are getting more and more torturous. But bro, you should go to a physics or chemistry-related interest society to do experiments." Luo Nan responded calmly, "Those societies require an internship period. I already obtained the relevant qualifications in middle school. There's no need for me to repeat my previous work." "The Mystic Arts Research Society is fine?" "Yes. I've read the introduction. I've also looked at the school forum. That's the only society that can conduct independent and free experiments at the freshman stage. Plus, many of them involve the field of psychotropic drugs. It's just what I need." Emoya ridiculed him. "Odd jobs can conduct free experiments? Maybe a skilled worker can. If the boss is an amateur, then that's even better." Emoya, who always had a sharp tongue, was actually choked by Luo Nan's words. She spoke several seconds later. "All right then, Mr. Skilled Worker. I'll just remind you one thing. If you switch societies in Acumen College, you'll certainly be labeled as a misfit. For the next 4 years. Oh no. You're a 10th grade student, so that makes it 8 years. You'll have plenty of time to regret it." "Oh." Luo Nan's response made Emoya sneer. "All right then. Now let's talk about the issue of remuneration." "Remuneration? I risked my life to block a bullet for you and you're done with a single word of thanks. Oh, what do you want? Lend me your apartment for one night. I'll hold a small party." Luo Nan hesitated for a moment. "What date?" "The 15th of next month. There's still 20 days, 19 days. All right then. 19 days. I don't need you to prepare anything. All you need to do is hide those shameful things and move them away. I'll arrange the rest." Luo Nan calculated the time. "It shouldn't be a problem. But you need to give me a heads up 5 days in advance." "You're not straightforward." "Then that's that." Emoya hung up the phone. Luo Nan had a headache over the temporary relocation and placement that would take place in 19 days. Even so, he was still grateful to Emoya. If it wasn't for his cousin covering him up for so many years, how could he continue to carry out dangerous experimental work under the eyes of his aunt? Luo Nan shook his head and decided to toss these miscellaneous matters to tomorrow to consider. Right now it was September 26th, A.D. 2096, 1922. The inefficient daytime had finally passed. Luo Nan welcomed the tranquil and precious time of the night. He walked into the study. A black leather case was placed upright on the desk. It wasn't small in size and looked rather abrupt. Luo Nan entered his fingerprint and password and lifted the lid of the case. A low hissing sound rang out and the neatly arranged utensils within the case were lifted layer by layer. They were pulled by their respective carriers like unfurling flower petals, entering their predetermined positions one by one. In an instant, the desk had transformed into a simple yet complete workbench. Luo Nan took out a portable medical cooler from the bookcase and placed it on the desk. After opening it, there were all sorts of sealed pharmaceutical raw materials inside. After a series of tests confirmed that there were no mistakes, the white powder sent by ink was placed inside. Now, all the materials and tools needed for tonight's work were prepared. At the very least, everything that could be prepared was here. Having done all this, Luo Nan took a deep breath. He opened a secret compartment on the side of the desk and took out an old notebook. The cover of the notebook was brown. Its shape was the same as the notebook that Luo Nan always carried with him. They were both loose-leaf notebooks. But because of the long years of use, the brown notebook was affected by the large amount of ink in ink. The cover looked a bit loose and the cover was a bit bulging. There was no flexible e-ink screen inside either. Luo Nan placed his notebook to the side and carefully flipped open the brown notebook. There was a neat hand-drawn diagram in the center of the title page of the notebook. It was just like how it often appeared in geometry classes. A triangular pyramid, or more accurately, a tetrahedron, and its inscribed sphere and circumscribed sphere formed a completely flawless diagram structure. Below this group of pictures, someone had written 4 short sentences in a messy handwriting. My heart is a prison. My heart is a furnace. My heart is a mirror. My heart is a nation. Luo Nan didn't dare to say that he could understand the true meaning of this diagram and these 16 words. However, every time he flipped to this page, he would observe and read it silently. All of his chaotic thoughts would settle down and his mind would naturally return to tranquility. Luo Nan paused on the title page for a few seconds before flipping to the back. He searched for the contents and keywords related to pharmaceutical preparations within the densely packed words and sentences. Then he immersed himself in pondering over these profound words and complex molecular formulas. Weakening, substitution, simplification. Grandpa, you help me out. Time quickly passed amidst his murmurs. The lights outside the window lit up and then went out. Luo Nan's attention was constantly moving back and forth between the notebook and the experimental apparatus in front of the workbench. He added all sorts of pharmaceutical ingredients according to the data in the notebook. During this time, he only took a nap during the slow reaction stage of the ingredients. He slept for around 2 hours. At 3:15 in the morning, the turbid liquid within the reaction apparatus began to boil violently following the addition of the last drop of solution. The color slowly changed as well. Luo Nan stared closely at the transparent apparatus that seemed like it could explode at any moment to confirm whether or not the reaction met his requirements. Only after 2 minutes did he stretch his somewhat stiff neck. He began to clean up the junk on the workbench and at the same time, he counted in a low voice, dimethyltryptamine stock 0, cathinone stock 0, medroxyphenum stock 2 mg, cetalostat 5 mg. Following his voice, the flipped open flexible e-ink screen of the self-used notebook on the workbench flickered with a glimmer of light. The recording table on the interface automatically changed the relevant data. The majority of the drug stock had already returned to 0 or was infinitely close to 0. The junk that Luo Nan cleaned up was mainly the packaging containers of these drugs. He cleaned and disinfected the recyclable ones and sorted the non-recyclable ones. He spent around half an hour of time before the small workbench was restored to order and cleanliness. The light green drug within the reaction apparatus continued to boil before slowly cooling down. At this point, Luo Nan could basically confirm that his one night of hard work had not been wasted. However, there was a corresponding short record on the brown notebook. Multiple peripheral neuritis has appeared on Q11R. Allergic symptoms have appeared on Q27R. She is on the verge of death. The other test bodies are normal. Basically, there is a substitute effect. The side effects are hard to determine. Luo Nan shook his head. He estimated that there was still a bit of time left. He swiped the flexible screen and went online to the occult orb forum that he frequented. Though it was early in the morning, the night owls on the forum were still engaged in a lively debate. The center of the debate was none other than Xia City. Recently, Xia City's bizarre earthquake period had set off wave after wave of climaxes on this forum that was filled with mysticism. Many people were discussing the cause of the earthquake, the geological structure, the resonance of the tectonic plates, the leakage of vital energy. All sorts of bizarre topics could be brought up. There were even people who swore in all sincerity that a certain large company was conducting secret experiments in Xia City. It was very likely that this was the source of this earthquake period. Luo Nan was not the least bit interested in these boring topics. There were only two things that he was concerned about. First, would the earthquake affect his experiments? Second, would the increasingly intense panic make his aunt forcefully drag him back? Luo Nan habitually entered his access password and prepared to log into the internal section of the forum. But a website notification popped up. Your access is insufficient. Please request verification from the administrator. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment, then he lightly smacked his forehead. Yes, he had already been kicked into a small black room. The reason for being banned was very simple. These were extraordinary times. All purchasing posts were treated as phishing posts. This was a new rule established in the forum half a month ago after the police destroyed a certain transnational illegal drug trading network. The wind was tight, but Luo Nan bumped his head against the muzzle of a gun. Getting his ID banned was a small matter. What was troublesome was having his drug channel severed. Looking at his current stock of drug ingredients, even if Mrs. Luo Shuqing didn't make a move, he would soon be unable to continue. And the majority of the 50 commonly used drugs he needed were classified under the controlled list of psychotropic drugs. As a minor, it was impossible for him to purchase them from a pharmacy. Could it be that he really had to walk the black line? Admittedly, this channel of the Secret Star Forum was illegal, but the source of goods was quite reliable. Many of the goods were additional transactions from manufacturers. They were used to evade the strict control of psychotropic drugs. They could barely be considered within the scope of business. As for the black line, the quality of the test products that Inc. brought over today was passable. But the goods on this line were directed towards serious crimes. The upstream and downstream had close connections with gangs. Frankly speaking, they were a gang of drug dealers. So, compared to dealing with drug dealers, what did entering the Mystic Arts Research Society amount to? He didn't expect to be able to gather all the raw materials from the society. As long as he could find a new evolutionary channel, then he would make a profit. Finally, the liquid within the reaction vessel stopped boiling and it rapidly cooled down. Luo Nan immediately collected all of his distracting thoughts and opened the valve. He let the drug flow into the needle-less syringe that he had prepared earlier. Then he injected the massive amount of psychotropic drug mixture into the blood vessels of his upper arm. His expression didn't change in the slightest from beginning to end. Next, Luo Nan meticulously cleaned the experimental apparatus. Then he pressed the restore button, restoring the black suitcase to its original state. Only then did he tear off his gloves and carefully place the brown leather notebook back into the secret compartment. He hid the cold case in the bookcase and went to the bathroom to wash up. At 4 o'clock sharp, Luo Nan changed into a sports hoodie and carried the black leather notebook that never left his body. He walked out of the house and began his unshakable daily morning run. Chapter 2. A Genius in 1 Second. Remember love? Speak, net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. The main body of the city was still sleeping in the darkness, allowing the neon lights and street lights to decorate and smear the city. The haze of light from the city sprinkled into the sky, illuminating the layout of the clouds that was filled with an ominous aura. The earthquake clouds had yet to disperse. Luckily, the crows were still sleeping peacefully on the trees, preserving the peace and quiet of the early morning. Ink sensed something from atop a large tree near a high-rise apartment building. It opened its eyes and watched Luo Nan run under the tree. It then closed its eyes and dozed off. In a giant metropolitan area like Xia City, there were magnetic rails, overhead bridges, green corridors and self-propelled conveyor belts that connected the tall buildings to and fro. It was like a dense forest that was entwined by leaves and vines. Luo Nan was like a tiny bug. He swallowed the morning dew and trudged forward step by step within the forest. His lips and teeth slightly opened and closed. His throat, mouth and nose vibrated to the fullest, emitting a sound. It sounded like the buzzing of an insect flapping its wings. Actually, Luo Nan had repeated the words, "My heart is a prison, my heart is a furnace. My heart calls for a mirror, my heart calls for a nation." It was only because the syllables were connected and shortened, and it was mixed together with the rhythm of his breathing that this strange sound was formed. Occasionally there were people who got up for their morning jogs. They passed by him and were confused by the sound. They turned their heads to size him up. Luo Nan focused on moving forward from beginning to end. His speed and rhythm were all maintained in a relatively stable range. Luo Nan continued to train for an hour before he turned onto a self-propelled conveyor belt to cross the wide space between two tall buildings. This was the designated rest stop. His exercise was suspended, but his chanting continued without end. His breathing was quite smooth. The long period of resonating and chanting resulted in a lack of oxygen, causing his cranial cavity to faintly swell. But compared to the effects of the drug that was gradually accumulating and spreading, this was child's play. The psychotropic drug components contained within the drug he injected before leaving the house were displaying their effects one after another. In reality, any normal person, including a drug addict of many years, would instantly lose their life in the shortest amount of time after injecting such a high-purity psychotropic drug component into their nervous system through intravenous injection. However, Luo Nan's external appearance was no different from that of a normal person after nearly 2,000 times of gradual deepening and unceasingly adjusting his tolerance process. But the structure of his internal nervous system had already undergone subtle and profound changes. He was still alive and he was earnestly sensing the changes in his body. More than 20 types of psychotropic drugs broke through the barrier of the blood-brain barrier. Like more than 20 invisible knives, they targeted different neurons and modified and carved them again and again. This kind of sculpting was destined to be rough and violent. The brain itself did not feel pain, but under the effect of drugs, it secreted dozens of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, norepinephrine, glutamate, and vasopressin. They released information like a tide, and through the conduction of neurons, they acted on every piece of skin, every organ, and every corner of the body. It was impossible to describe what kind of feeling it was. Luo Nan didn't want to describe it either. It could only be said that this was much better than the initial spasms of limbs, incontinence of urine and feces, and even heart and lung failure. To change the basic structure of the human body that had been passed down for thousands of generations in just a few short years, there was bound to be a price to pay. Luo Nan had long since become calm in his heart. He closed his eyes and concentrated more on chanting and breathing. Luo Nan's chanting breathing technique was inherited from his grandfather. Nominally, it was an aid to the sculpting of drugs. But how could a human's will control changes on the cellular and molecular level? Therefore, Luo Nan believed that its main function was to maintain mental focus and activate blood and energy. In addition, it was a visualization that had the color of mysticism. Luo Nan closed his eyes. The tetrahedron diagram corresponding to the 16-word incantation, as well as its inscribed and circumscribed spheres, all appeared clearly in his mind. They revolved around the center, rotating layer by layer. It was as if they were right before his eyes. Luo Nan opened his eyes approximately 10 seconds later and let out a long sigh. The visualization diagram revolved smoothly. Everything was fine. Luo Nan had only traveled half the distance on the automatic conveyor belt. He relaxed his mind and sized up the early morning city. There was a nightclub street of Xia City not too far away. Many people said that life in Xia City only completely opened up at midnight. Morning was the lingering charm. As for the daytime, it was merely the charging phase of machinery. Within this enormous and crowded city, every cluster of lights was a playground for people to release their pleasure. The most flourishing nightclub district was especially so. There was a group of men and women under the neon lights. Their clothes were disheveled as they came out of a nightclub. All of them were staggering. Just because the people in front were a bit slower, the car behind them crashed into the car in front. They rolled into a messy ball like a wriggling fat worm. They couldn't get up no matter how hard they tried. They didn't get angry. They just pushed each other over there. They laughed and giggled. It was clear that they had experienced a night of partying. They had exhausted all their strength. Only the excessive secretion of dopamine continued to transmit between their neurons. They were this casual and unrestrained. It was as if they were saying, "Look, this is the life that young people should have." A luxurious flying car with no one driving it glided across the street amidst the chaos. It stopped at the side and the classic butterfly door opened handsomely. A rather tall man finally emerged from the wriggling human body. He struggled to crawl up. During this time he practically kissed all the women around him. He grabbed a long-legged woman next to him amidst the laughter and curses of his companions. He half-dragged, half-carried her to the car. The neon lights of the nightclub street just so happened to illuminate the man's face clearly and clearly. Luo Nan just happened to recognize him. So it's him. He can be considered a good specimen. Luo Nan's mind stirred. He observed these men and women even more seriously. Half a minute later, the loose-leaf notebook that never left his body displayed its use. He used an electronic pen to quickly draw a general outline of the area on the flexible e-ink screen. The self-driving conveyor belt carried Luo Nan for 75 seconds. Excluding the previous consumption, Luo Nan's pen only formed a messy and crisscross draft of lines in the remaining few dozen seconds. He didn't have any intentions of continuing. He waited for the conveyor belt to reach its end before putting away his pen. He swept a glance below and directly left. When he turned his head, he saw the man who had triggered the idea of drawing. He didn't know how, but he actually noticed his existence. The man raised his head and looked over in a stupefied manner. The gazes of the two intersected in the void. Luonan didn't take it to heart. He continued to chant the continuous syllables, forming the vibrating sound of an insect flapping its wings. He continued his morning run. As for the noise that came from afar, it was naturally filtered out. Xie Junping felt that he was about to go crazy. His throat-tearing shout didn't have any effect. The figure on the self-driving conveyor belt left without even turning his head back. His bad friends and friends with benefits were still laughing and giggling under the effects of the stimulant compound. Long Legs, who he had just found extremely pleasing to the eye, was now hugging his waist and giggling foolishly. She fumbled about to undo his belt. Xie Junping really was about to go crazy. Get lost. He forcefully pushed Long Legs away and dove headfirst into the car. He didn't care about the shouts of the group of trash outside. He locked the car door. At this time, the light film contact lenses produced by Quantum Corporation did a simple analysis of the data that had just been collected, mapping it onto the retina. The photo of the candid photographer on the overhead bridge appeared on the instantaneous image, revealing a blurry profile. And the plum blossom bamboo school emblem of Acumen College was circled in red on the sportswear. A bit later, the AI of the phantom car analyzed the surrounding environmental data automatically recorded by the alarm system. The results of the analysis were transmitted back one by one. This was much clearer than the photo taken in an emergency, but there was no fluke to speak of in the results. When Xie Junping saw the hooded, candid photographer, holding a notebook in his hand, writing and drawing, he smashed his fist on the steering wheel. The flying car honked. The idiot outside, who was knocking on the window, was so startled that he leaned back. The flying car had already started up in a flash before his but hit the ground, whistling away. I've been seen. I've been seen. Xie Junping fiercely smacked his skull. If this was a different time and place, a rich young master who was good at socializing would have some problems in his private life. But the current situation was different. According to the arrangements of the society, he should be in the satellite city of Mengzhong right now. He should be in charge of a post-disaster charity donation activity. Last night he really was in Mengzhong. But for the sake of participating in the carnival party, he left the team and snuck out. He drove several hundred kilometers back to Xia City. Originally, he wanted to immediately return after the party ended. Who would have thought that he would be caught red-handed by a student of his school? Right now, he was striving for the senior medal of the Honor Society. He was also attempting to take a step forward in the student council. He was currently at the crucial stage of establishing his status in the circle. The significance of this was equivalent to a general election. If one were to use the standards of a politician, lying, going back on his word, and being a hypocrite were undoubtedly necessary qualities. But if one were to be kicked out, it would simply be fatal. Fatal stupidity. What's more, Xia City was currently experiencing a series of earthquakes. Everyone's hearts were in a state of panic. Everyone's mental endurance was declining. Normally it wouldn't be a problem. Now it would become a problem. What used to be a small matter would become a big matter now. Yes, something big had happened. The car phone rang. It was none other than those bad friends from just now. Xie Junping had left in too much of a hurry. There were many things he had forgotten to arrange. He hastily picked up, but before he could say anything, Lian Yu's indistinct cursing voice could be heard. Xie Junping, you bastard. The strange laughter of those bad friends was heard in the background. Xie Junping closed his eyes. That's right. He actually forgot. Lian Yu. This slut who wanted to undo his belt actually had a master. Her real boyfriend was also a member of the Honor Society. *CK. Xie Junping pounded the steering wheel once more. The force was so great that even the car's AI gave him a warning. But after he vented this time, he finally recovered some clarity from his hangover and panic. Calm down. I have to calm down. As long as I don't immediately expose myself on the internet, there will always be a chance to redeem myself. He did his best to maintain a calm tone. He whispered, Lian Yu, go wash your face right now. I have something to tell you. Lian Yu was still drunk. Xie Junping, you bastard. Go wash your face. Now. Xie Junping roared loudly. He hated that he couldn't shatter the car phone. The wrath of the Son of Heaven will lay 1,000,000 corpses. If a warrior is angry, blood will flow 5 steps away. However, the other side just hung up the phone without hesitation. Xie Junping could only smash his head to the ground in the wrath of an ordinary man. Xie Junping slapped his head on the steering wheel and forced himself to calm down. He actually knew himself quite well. He knew that he was more or less an ordinary man. His intelligence and ability were average. He only had his family's connections to back him up. At most, he had a bit of social skills. However, he was able to walk to this step in Acumen College where experts were as common as clouds. How did he do it? It was nothing more than being a qualified boss. He gave the appropriate remuneration and left professional matters to professionals to do. *CK professional. Xie Junping slapped the steering wheel again. Why the hell was he entangled with this woman Lian Yu? Apart from hooking up with men, where did she display her professional accomplishments? Once his train of thought became clear, he immediately threw Lian Yu to the back of his mind. He dialed another number. The standby ringtone was an extremely gentle female voice. Hello, the Hidden Indigo firm is at your service. Every day before 9 o'clock and after 17 o'clock on weekdays, as well as all days off and holidays, all services will be calculated as overtime fees. This notice is hereby given. Thank you for your cooperation. Xie Junping rolled his eyes. After a moment, a clear and lively voice that was completely different from the voice from before rang out. Long time no see. Hello, sheep. Xie Junping was instantly defeated by this form of address. He wanted to retort but didn't have the confidence. He could only grit his teeth and say, Ying, right? Good morning. Is Boss Wu not here? Are you sure you want to see the boss? No. It's good that I'm looking for you. It's good that I'm looking for you. Xie Junping fiercely slapped his forehead. He really had drunk himself silly today. Why was he getting angry with this crazy lass? That's right. If you have something to say, it's the same as saying it to me. In any case, no matter who it is, they're going to rip you off. Xie Junping wanted to eat the car computer, but now wasn't the time to bicker. He could only get straight to the point. Today I've attracted a bit of trouble. I need your help to deal with it. He used the fastest speed to describe what had happened earlier. At the same time, he also sent over the captured photos and videos for further analysis. Ying quickly replied, Secretly taking pictures? Should I admire your imagination? Not secretly taking pictures? Standing on a moving conveyor belt, waiting for you to come out from the nightclub and then taking pictures. Xie Junping was momentarily stumped. Although it was a fierce rebuttal, there was no need to doubt the professionalism of the Hidden Indigo. Approximately half a minute later, Ying reported the coordinates of a location. No matter what, let's do a verification first. Not taking into account complicated factors, if that person is just passing by, then he should be the early morning jogger type. Today isn't a holiday, so his destination is very likely Acumen College. You go here and wait. Xie Junping felt that this was very reasonable. The flying car immediately changed directions and cut into another magnetic track, increasing its speed once again. Approximately 5 minutes later, he drove the car to the location Ying had indicated. This was a pedestrian viaduct located within the high-tech research and development area. The environment was very good, and it was also one of the main nodes leading to the academy. It was very hard for morning joggers to refuse this route. The flying car stopped at the northern end of the viaduct. Afterwards, all they had to do was wait. Xie Junping couldn't help but be restless and impatient. And at this time, a formatted chart appeared on his retina. It was a personal data extracted from Acumen College's database. The electronic photo showed a very quiet and introverted youth. He could be considered handsome, but there was no smile on his face. Chapter 3. Genius in 1 second. Remember Love Go? Speak, net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. This is the photo stealer that you spoke of. Ying simply analyzed the data. Luo Nan, 16 years old. He entered Acumen College on the 1st of September this year. His enrollment results were average. The evaluations given by his elementary and middle school teachers weren't anything special. He appeared to be very ordinary. Xie Junping was only concerned about one thing. In other words, it's unlikely that he's a paparazzi or something like that? Ying didn't respond directly. She continued to analyze the data. What's worth noting is that his aunt was written as his guardian. As for his parents, I looked it up. His mother passed away due to a difficult birth. His father went missing a long time ago. Strange. Is there still such a thing as a difficult birth? You mean, the environment in which he grew up is quite special. His personality might be a bit eccentric. We need to observe him further. Right now, release your vehicle privileges and turn on the surveillance system. I want to observe him at the same time. Xie Junping immediately did as he was told. Not long after synchronizing the data, Luo Nan's jogging figure appeared at the top of the viaduct. The sky was only slightly bright right now. The figure in the distance was extremely blurry. Luckily, the Phantom flying car's surveillance system had undergone professional modifications. It possessed strong detection and anti-detection capabilities. Xie Junping was able to discover that he was being photo-stealer because of the automatic warning from the car's AI. Xie Junping observed each and every movement of the photo-stealer through the surveillance system, but he wasn't able to see anything for a while. On the other hand, Ying already had a preliminary conclusion. Congratulations, sheepdog. You can basically conclude that he wasn't specifically targeting you. Can you hear the sound of his breathing? Through the surveillance system's powerful sound wave collection and filtering capabilities, it was completely possible to reproduce the whispers of a target 50 meters away. The clear breathing of a morning jogger was no exception. That buzzing sound. Is he panting? It's really like a bee, right? It should be a special breathing technique. It also has a special way of saying words. I'm not clear on the specific effects. Perhaps there's no effect at all. His lung capacity is just a bit better than a normal person. But he's extremely focused. Look at his eyes. That kind of light. TSK. Would a photo stealer with bad intentions train so hard after committing a crime? Xie Junping's nervousness was finally relieved, and a smile appeared on his face. But in the next moment, Luo Nan, who was descending from the highest point of the viaduct, suddenly shifted his gaze. From the image transmitted by the surveillance system, it seemed that Luo Nan's gaze locked with Luo Nan's. With the one-way membrane shielding, of course, people outside the car couldn't see what was inside, but Xie Junping was still shocked. He discovered us? Your illusion is too eye-catching, and he's much more sensitive than I thought. Ying also seemed to be interested. He must have sensed it, but his expression didn't change. He's not someone who shows his emotions. These kinds of people usually had a lot of ideas and were more scheming. However, he was able to maintain his focus, which meant that his willpower was above average. By the way, speaking of willpower, I just made a very interesting discovery. Do you want to hear it? Xie Junping watched Luo Nan approach step by step. He was at a loss as to how to respond. How could he have the leisure to listen to this? But Ying didn't care about him. According to the school's information, Luo Nan's home address is in the River Wu District's Blue Bay community. The straight-line distance from Acumen College is close to 40 kilometers. Of course, it wouldn't be far if he took the low-altitude public transport or the subway. But running here would be a marathon a day. According to his lung capacity, breathing method, and muscle structure, running every time would be equivalent to peeling off a layer of skin. If he were to do this every day... Oh my god, he's really masochistic. Holy crap. Xie Junping felt his scalp go numb just thinking about the consumption. Ying continued her analysis. Judging from the above situation, he wouldn't normally be the impulsive type. He wouldn't make a hasty decision under unclear circumstances. But if you give him a bad impression or make him feel threatened, the consequences will be hard to predict. Get out of the car now. Don't tell me you came over just to watch him run? Come on, isn't this clearly showing that you have thoughts towards him? Hurry up and get out of the car. Talk to him. Don't you always call yourself a socialite? Or does it only have this sheep's mouth attribute? Xie Junping clearly knew that she was goading him, but there was no man who would be willing to slap his own face in front of a woman. Xie Junping took a deep breath and slapped his face. He did his best to sober up a bit from his hangover. Only then did he open the butterfly door of his illusion and step out. This time he really was face to face with Luo Nan. The two were separated by approximately 40 meters. Xie Junping brought out the demeanor he had during the student council election. He waved his hand at Luo Nan from afar, greeting him. Ying's voice seemed to ring out from the depths of his brain through the built-in headphones. Excellent. You're acting like a dog. Pay attention. Don't put on that stinking air. Your current image is that of a shameless and degenerate, but you can still be considered a straightforward playboy. Also, you need to be a bit more honest. He's much smarter than you think. Xie Junping really felt like he had returned to the time of the election. He was also under the guidance of his aide step by step, managing his image in front of the voters. Luckily, Ying's request wasn't difficult. It was practically his own performance. He saw Luo Nan slow down in front of him. Luo Nan's eyes looked straight at him. Luo Nan's expression didn't change much, nor did he have any intention of responding. It was hard to fathom. Xie Junping decided to take the initiative to attack. He walked a few steps forward. Student, I'm sorry. I want to talk to you. The distance between the two was less than 10 meters. Luo Nan nodded in greeting. Senior Xie. Xie Juanping's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He asked reflexively, "You know me?" Ying's dissatisfied voice rang out. "What are you panicking for?" Luo Nan responded at practically the same time. Number 24. I participated in the Society Recommendation Counseling session hosted by Senior. All right. There really was such a thing. Xie Junping cursed himself for being a good-for-nothing. He rearranged his words and asked despite knowing the answer. What's your name, Junior? Luo Nan. Okay, Junior Luo Nan. I'm very sorry to disturb your morning run. However, there's something I need your help with. Yes, it's that embarrassing matter just now. I can't be seen too much right now. Let's talk in the car? Ying gave a light praise. Your tone of self-mockery isn't bad. Luo Nan thought for a bit and didn't refuse. Luo Nan drilled into the car and sat in the front passenger seat. He placed his notebook on his knees and sat upright. He looked just like an honest student who conformed to the rules. Xie Junping saw that Luo Nan was quite cooperative. He let out a secret sigh and sat back in the car. He followed Ying's instructions and didn't close the car door to avoid the psychological suggestion brought about by the enclosed space. He took out a bottle of energy drink from the mini fridge in the back seat and handed it over. Rehydrate yourself. Thank you, Senior. Luo Nan displayed a polite distance from beginning to end. He received the drink but didn't open it. Ying's advice came in again. Idiot. Don't beat around the bush. These kinds of people have fast brains. They have a lot of ideas. It'll be troublesome if they make a misjudgment. You need to pay attention. You were too vague before. What embarrassing matter? Just say the time and place. Xie Junping hurriedly cut to the chase. Junior brother, forgive me for being presumptuous, but I'd like to ask, about 10 minutes ago, which is around 5 o'clock, were you at the eastbound twin buildings automatic conveyor belt? Luo Nan held the ice-cold bottle of energy in his hand and answered simply, Yes, Senior. You saw me come out of the nightclub? I saw you. Xie Junping slapped his forehead and made an extremely vexed appearance. 50% of this was a performance, 30% was venting, and 20% was waiting for Ying's instructions. Ying didn't disappoint him. Her instructions came quickly. He didn't deliberately pursue the initiative. You asked him a question and he answered. It's very likely that his social skills are lacking. But his performance isn't inexperienced. He probably cares quite a bit about his personal image. These kinds of people are open to coaxing but not coercion in most situations. But don't directly talk about money. Xie Junping understood in an instant. He laughed bitterly on the spot. Junior. As your senior, I've really lost face today. I have nothing to say about this sort of thing happening. But right now we're in extraordinary times. He pointed out the matter of obtaining the Honor Society's senior medal. Then he put his hands together and bowed a few times towards Luo Nan. He spoke in a half-exaggerated, half-sincere manner. I know it's not very nice to say this, but Junior, can you close one eye and let me off this time? I don't really care about my reputation or anything, but that medal is really very, very important to me. Xie Junping's performance this time could absolutely be considered top-notch. His attitude was very low, and his face had a bit of a playboyish cheap smile. It highlighted his thick skin, and it indirectly dispelled some of the seriousness of the situation. It prevented Luo Nan from stimulating Luo Nan's greed, which would lead to even greater trouble. Luo Nan was calm from beginning to end. Senior, you don't need to be like this. I'm not a gossiper and I won't talk behind people's backs. I can trust you, Junior. But this is the information age. Photos, videos, and the like aren't very safe. I didn't take a photo. I just felt that the scene was a bit special, so I drew a sketch at the last minute as a souvenir. Luo Nan unfolded his notebook as he spoke, lighting up the flexible e-ink screen to show Xie Junping his work from just now. Xie Junping felt a bit relieved when he saw the fuzzy lines and shadows. Ying suddenly spoke just as he was about to speak again. Lend me the notebook. Ying spoke too quickly. Xie Junping practically heard the word snatch. He immediately broke into a cold sweat. Xie Junping was stupefied for 2 seconds before he thought of an excuse. Junior, it seems inconvenient to carry this notebook around all day. Is there a special use for it? Xie Junping spoke the truth. Luo Nan's loose-leaf notebook was made by binding the flexible screen and traditional paper together. With the flexible screen, traditional pages didn't seem to be of much use. And if he were to use traditional pages, the flexible screen would also be a burden. He extended his hand as he spoke. adopting a curious and probing appearance. Actually, he was a bit apprehensive in his heart. He was afraid that Luonan would get angry and cause side issues. Luonan was quite magnanimous. He handed the loose-leaf notebook to Xie Junping. This kind of notebook was very popular during World War III. This was because during the chaos of war or in the desolate countryside, there were no ubiquitous charging facilities. It was very easy for electronic products to turn into scrap. Traditional pen and paper were more reliable than electronic products during these times. And when logistics were plentiful, efficiency could be rapidly increased. The flexible screen could be swapped at any time. The cost wasn't high either. A product from World War III? It's been a few decades and it's still been released? Luonan smiled. This caused the contours of his face to become even gentler. My grandfather loved this kind of notebook the most back in the day. He once bought over 1,000 of them in one go. I'm using one of them right now. And my grandfather made at least several hundred similar notebooks. Every single one of them was filled to the brim. But I can't see the majority of them right now. Wow, so it's an antique. Xie Junping casually flipped through it. He saw that the majority of the notebook was still blank. Only a few pages had a few formulas, numbers and diagrams written on them. It looked like they were casually jotted down. Xie Junping couldn't make out their origins in a short amount of time. Xie Junping's attention was mainly on the flexible screen. The drawing software was still active right now. He swiped his finger, switching through page after page. He asked in passing, the flexible screen was also from 50 years ago? This drawing software looked quite unfamiliar. No, I bought it later. Xie Junping didn't need Yingying's reminder, for he could hear signs of Luonan changing his words at the last minute. But soon he was attracted by the images one by one. In browsing mode, Xie Junping saw many images that were similar to his previous image. There were images both inside and outside the campus. In classrooms, on the streets, there were even images of some bars, nightclubs, and party scenes. These images were laid out one after another, displaying the rich images of all living beings. Xie Junping was a bit stupefied. As a well-educated rich second generation, he still had a bit of a basic appreciation level. Though each and every one of these sketches were rather sloppy and some didn't even have any backgrounds drawn, Xie Junping was very familiar with these places. He could always see through the curves of the human figures on the sketches to understand what place was depicted in the end, what scene and what person. The last one was too exaggerated. What he meant was that he could see the intense body language of the human figures depicted by the outlines of the lines in the sketches. Speaking a bit mysteriously, he could see concentration, excitement, dejection, and madness from the sketches. Those rough lines depicted the atmosphere of the scene in the pictures. They depicted the emotions of the people in the pictures, and even the attitudes of each person. Luonan used the digital pen to outline the lines. They clearly had a sharp feeling of tearing apart the surface of the picture. They pointed directly at a certain truth hidden deep within the human heart. Xie Junping inexplicably sweated from seeing this. Holy crap! Did I just discover a new Picasso? Xie Junping flipped to the last page and saw the sketch with him as the model. Xie Junping was actually a bit stupefied until Yingying's voice woke him up. He was clearly quite excited when he talked about the notebook and the topic of his grandfather. I just looked up some information and found some very interesting things. Idiot. Flip a few more pages. You've been stupefied for too long. Be careful not to be misunderstood. You're the one talking to me. Xie Junping cursed Yingying over 100 times in his mind, but he still did as she said like a marionette. Yingying's voice continued to transmit. His grandfather's name was Luo Yuandao. He was once a researcher, but he didn't have any achievements worthy of praise. But in the year 83, which is 13 years ago, someone testified against him. They said that he traveled far into the wilderness after the Third World War. He cooperated with the vagrant forces and privately conducted live human experiments. Holy crap! Xie Junping's swiping finger trembled. Perhaps he was feeling guilty, but he kept feeling that Luonan was staring at him. But now wasn't the right time to talk. He could only brace himself and press on. Chapter 4. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go? Talk. Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Of course, human experimentation wasn't a good word. Love, go, small sake, net, but in the present age the word vagrant was even worse. In the year 2044 the Third World War broke out. In a short 5 years, 70% of humanity's living space was destroyed. 50 years after the war, the entire world's population of 10 billion was squeezed into 88 mega-metropolises. They lived cramped and crowded lives. Only in the last 10 years did things gradually improve. Outside of the metropolises was the wilderness. It was vast and spacious, but it was ruined beyond recognition by nuclear radiation and mutants. It was completely unsuitable for human survival. However, there was a group of people who rejected modern civilization or were ostracized by civilized society, including extremists, fugitives, ambitious people. They gambled with their lives and wandered in the wilderness. Together, they formed the concept of vagrants. The law of the jungle. Inhumane. No bottom line. Similar words popped out one after another in Xie Juanping's head. He instantly had a standard template for Luo Nan's grandfather, whom he had never met before: evil scientist. The kind that appeared endlessly in superhero movies. Because of this matter, Luo Yuandao and his son had a falling out. His son, Luo Zhongheng, Luo Nan's father, suddenly left home and disappeared. There has been no news of him to this day. Luo Yuandao himself suffered from severe schizophrenia. He was hospitalized for a long time, but his condition worsened recently. He won't live for more than a few days. Xie Juanping's teeth ached from hearing this. He didn't care about anything else. He was just worried that Luo Nan would inherit some bad habits or have a warped personality in this environment. Yingying's tone took a turn at this time. However, this isn't the most interesting part. In the academic world, Luo Yuandao is a nameless person aside from that accusation. But there is another person related to him who is extremely famous. Yin Hong. You must know of him. Xie Junping nodded subconsciously. Of course he knew. Yin Hong was a famous professor of Acumen College a few years ago. He was famous in the world. But because of his academic misconduct, his reputation was swept away and he disappeared from mainstream society. It was quite a pity. Yin Hong's book, Research on the Archetype Neural Format, led to the appearance of the burner. It was undoubtedly a revolutionary achievement. It's impossible to overestimate its significance. I used to admire him. Yingying's tone didn't have the slightest bit of adoration, only excitement. The problem is, in the 90-year academic misconduct incident, someone destroyed his results. They used Luo Yuandao's undisclosed first-hand data. That's right, it's the data that was obtained from human experiments in the wilderness. The circle of nobles is really messy. Expensive my ass, I'm not from the academic circle. Xie Junping silently cursed again, but Yingying was really not gossiping. She had already begun an analysis that was closer to reality. Luo Nan was only 3 years old when the incident with Luo Yuandao happened in '83. His grandfather's scandal and his father's disappearance must have affected him throughout his childhood. How would a child understand all of this? What kind of personality would he have? Now we can see that he speaks in a more cultured manner and behaves very loftily, just like a model of morality. Putting aside the question of acting, there were two possibilities. The first is moral compensation. He feels ashamed and guilty about his grandfather's behavior, so he subconsciously demands himself with a high moral standard. In fact, he is cutting himself. But Yingying immediately denied it. Of course, if this was the case, then Luo Nan wouldn't have talked endlessly about his grandfather's notes and old matters. But the origin of that flexible screen might be a bit problematic. He is clearly avoiding something. Yingying didn't continue explaining. She directly jumped to the second topic. The other is his moral mission. If his grandfather possessed some sort of charisma, or no matter what his grandfather thought before, the 90-year academic storm was enough to exert some sort of subversive force, causing him to have some sort of conjecture or fantasy about his grandfather's achievements. Xie Junping couldn't help but raise his head to look at Luo Nan. Yingying's description was synchronized, and it was as if she was reciting a poem in cadence. Grandfather, perhaps you've been wronged? The burner was supposed to be his grandfather's achievement? That dying old man in the mental hospital was actually a great man that the secular world doesn't understand? All sorts of thoughts shaped his sense of destined loneliness into a solemn and stirring feeling of being the enemy of the world, a sense of mission. So he was introverted, unsociable, resolute, and vigilant. He was like a hero of darkness, a lonely and resolute charge towards the dark curtain of the world. Wow, I'm moved. The corner of Xie Juanping's mouth twitched when he heard this. The first part was the same, but the second part seemed more and more like a script. However, a 15 or 16-year-old youth like Luo Nan was at the age where he was brimming with heroic fantasies. Looking at Luo Nan's serious appearance, could it be that he really thought this way? Senior Xie? Luo Nan asked, but it was also like a reminder. Only now did Xie Junping discover that he had only cared about listening to Yingying's script. He had greatly lost his composure in front of Luo Nan. It would be terrible if he were to be misunderstood. He hurriedly returned the notebook and glossed over his comments. These drawings are quite good. Xie Junping himself felt shriveled and stiff when the words left his mouth. He couldn't bear to hear it. They can't be considered drawings. They're just sketches. Luo Nan was still very polite, but he politely said his goodbyes after taking back the notebook. If Senior doesn't have anything else, then I'll be leaving first. Xie Junping was stupefied for a moment when Luo Nan nodded towards him. He placed the energy drink on the dashboard, got off the car, and left in a straightforward and efficient manner. He was clearly being suspected. Xie Junping's heart was truly lacking in confidence. He hurriedly asked Ding Ying, shouldn't we express something? It turns out that my saliva has been wasted. Ying Ying's words carried a rather resentful tone. A fine noise suddenly entered his ears. Ying Ying's voice became indistinct. He could no longer hear her clearly. Hello? BZZT 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 BZZT. Damn it! Something happened at this time. Xie Junping was so anxious that his head was covered in sweat. He looked at Luo Nan, who had already walked far away. He couldn't care about anything else anymore. He rushed out of the car and shouted, Junior, I'll send you off. Luo Nan turned his head and responded, I'll just run over. Isn't it inconvenient for Senior? Oh yeah. Xie Junping was embarrassed. Right now he would die in the light. He had to hurry back to Guangzhong and nip the matter in the bud. He actually needed Luo Nan to remind him. He had reached a certain level of stupidity. Embarrassed, he could only follow his past habits and try to close the distance. Then I'll hold a special banquet to express my gratitude. I'll find a place to notify you in 2 days. He walked over as he spoke, wanting to exchange numbers. Luo Nan didn't refuse. The two touched their wristbands together, successfully exchanging numbers. They even shook hands in passing. Xie Junping was mulling over how to say a few good words when the area to his side suddenly lit up. He instinctively turned his head. All he saw was an azure bolt of lightning leaping under the dusky curtain of darkness. It looked like lightning at first glance, but looking at its direction, it was clearly striking from the ground to the sky. It cut straight into the clouds. Perhaps the contrast of light was too intense, but the buildings surrounding the lightning seemed to be warping. The flying car phantom sounded an alarm at practically the same time. What's going on? Xie Junping turned around and walked over to the car. But just as he took a few steps forward, his built-in headphones suddenly screeched. It was like the whistling of an old-fashioned microphone. He was caught off guard, and his eardrums were about to be torn apart by the sound waves. He let out a loud cry and reflexively covered his ears. But before his fingers could even touch his ears, his eyes felt another wave of pain. The temperature of the light film contact lenses instantly rose. Sensing that the situation was abnormal, the dissolving mechanism of the light film automatically activated, shutting down all of its functions. Xie Junping's vision turned blurry. The world spun and spun. This wasn't an illusion. It was a genuine trembling, rippling, and warping. The solid ground beneath his feet instantly turned into a rocking dinghy on the waves. He could see the tall buildings and the bridge warping and deforming within his field of vision. He could even see drifting sparks in the distance, reflecting a red light in the sky that had yet to light up. Earthquake. A major earthquake. This was the only thought that flickered in Xie Junping's mind for a time. But before it could be completely clear, there was nothing beneath his feet. His entire body fell down. The green belt at the head of the bridge, the railings, the stones, and his 500 million flying car phantom also fell at the same time. The bridge collapsed. The body of the bridge, which was known to be able to withstand a magnitude 9 earthquake, was like a toy block that had been kicked over. Half of the bridge had suddenly collapsed. Xie Junping's mind went blank. He instinctively let out a blood-curdling scream. His hands clawed wildly, wanting to grab something for support. He really did grab something hard. A piece of rubble that had fallen at the same time as him. Holding this thing in his hands had no meaning other than increasing his weight. Xie Junping's eyeballs nearly popped out. Then his field of vision spun. The blood-curdling scream had just begun when he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder joint, followed by his wrist. A great force ran through his entire body. The direction in which he was falling seemed to have changed in an instant. His entire body swayed violently. Xie Junping let out a blood-curdling scream. His voice was high-pitched and his tears were flowing. Right now the falling bridge body had already collided with the buildings below. A muffled explosion rang out and smoke and dust rose. There were also the startled cries of the passers-by. The situation was chaotic to the extreme. "Shut up." A deep and low voice broke through the interference of the noise and entered Xie Junping's ears. Xie Junping let out 2 more cries out of habit. Then he suddenly came to his senses. He fiercely shuddered and raised his head. He saw Luonan's face and half of his chest protruding out of the bridge. Of course, the most important thing was the arm that Luonan stretched out with all his might. It was slender and long. It wasn't thick and sturdy, but Luonan had forcefully snatched Xie Junping out from under the giant scythe of the Grim Reaper. They were still wrestling. It was unknown whether Xie Junping was lucky or unlucky. The impact that the viaduct withstood was extremely excessive. Though the body of the bridge body was already severely deformed, only a portion of the area at the edge of the bridge head had fractured. It just so happened to encircle Xie Junping within. Luonan, who was only 5 steps away from Xie Junping, was safe and sound. But it was precisely because of this that Luonan was able to rush up in time to grab Xie Junping's arm. Xie Junping didn't fall into a meat patty. The matter was not over yet. Luonan had grabbed him, but his strength was clearly lacking. It was very hard to exert more strength to lift Xie Junping up. The deadliest thing was that the bridge head had formed an inclined surface when it collapsed. Though the angle was small, Luonan was actually slowly sliding down under these circumstances. There was nothing in the surroundings that he could borrow strength from. The feeling of having one's life come to an end was absolutely unpleasant. Xie Junping strove to grab onto something, but his hands and feet struggled. Luonan's fingers that were clasping onto Xie Junping's wrist slid away by a hair's breadth. Xie Junping's body fell down. He was so frightened that he screamed and struggled. Luonan's expression was very ugly. He spoke with difficulty, "Don't move. Grab onto my hand." Xie Junping's mind was already blinded by fear. How could he listen? He continued to struggle. "Do you want to die?" An angry roar pierced into his ears, causing Xie Junping to fiercely quiver. He raised his head and just happened to see Luonan's eyes. Ying had mentioned before that Luonan's eyes were suffused with light when he was training. But from Xie Junping's distance, Luonan's eyes weren't clear at all. They carried dense wisps of blood, and there were even some faint green and yellow mixed colors. But it was these mottled colors that seemed to form an abstract and bewitching scene in an instant. It was deeply branded into Xie Junping's heart. Xie Junping was unable to say what it was, but his heart inexplicably tightened. His entire body went rigid. Luonan's angry roar had already consumed a lot of energy. His voice was low right now and it was even a bit hoarse. "Look at your hand. What are you doing?" Xie Junping looked over in the blink of an eye. He saw that his right hand, the one that Luonan had grabbed onto, was tightly curled up. It was as stiff as a piece of dead wood. Luonan's palm was fiercely holding onto the stone that had fallen with him. The edge of the stone had pierced into his palm, causing blood to flow. Luonan didn't even realize it. This was probably some sort of stress reaction. Luonan had completely lost his sense of pain. His flesh and the stone seemed to have fused together. Fear was the glue. "Let go," Luonan commanded. Xie Junping also wanted to let go, but his normally nimble palm and fingers were completely stiff. He was so anxious that his forehead was beaded with sweat, but he didn't listen to Luonan at all. I. Don't let go. Don't let go no matter what." Luonan took a deep breath and stared fixedly at Xie Junping. "Don't look at your hand. Look at my eyes." Right now, as long as Luonan didn't let go, Xie Junping would certainly listen to everything Luonan said. He was like a marionette. He would do whatever Luonan said. Xie Junping stared straight into Luonan's eyes once more. The mottled color structure was like a pair of turbid whirlpools, locking his attention firmly in place. Luonan's voice directly exploded in the depths of his skull in the next moment. "Let go." It wasn't just his palm and fingers that relaxed. In that instant, all the strength in Xie Junping's entire body drained away cleanly. His fingers loosened and the blood-stained stone fell straight down. It first smashed onto his shoulder and then it fell down again. Xie Junping was awoken by this pain. He felt his body go soft and heavy. It seemed that he was sliding down again. He reflexively grabbed back with his palm amidst his screams. This time he successfully locked onto Luonan's wrist. He didn't let go. With Xie Junping sharing the burden, Luonan was finally able to fine-tune the position of his fingers in order to better exert force. After a series of adjustments, the tense situation had a bit of a buffer. Xie Junping's blood-congested brain began to recover clarity, and he could sense a bit more elements. The cold morning wind blew over and his body swayed. There were also noises within the wind. There were the sounds of explosions, the rumbling echoes of collapsing buildings, and the piercing sound of police sirens. He didn't need his eyes to understand the chaos in his surroundings. Thanks to the Dark Hero? Right now Xie Junping was completely convinced by Yingying's analysis. Otherwise he would certainly have become a pile of minced meat within a pile of rubble. But he hoped that the Dark Hero would put in a bit more effort and pull him up. Just as he opened his mouth, an inexplicably powerful sound came rumbling over. Chapter 5. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Show.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. The intensity of the sound was simply incredible. The sound waves gathered together like a heavy punch from a boxing champion, ruthlessly smashing into his ears. It was also like a ferocious beast pressing its bloody mouth against his cheek and roaring angrily. Xie Junping swore that he had never heard such a terrifying sound in his life. The shockwave passed through his entire body, causing his eyes to bulge out of their sockets, and his internal organs to flip and jump about. In his daze, the outer shell of his flesh was like a broken water bag that could split apart at any moment. An unprecedented sense of fear swept through his heart like a storm. In an incomparably clear manner, the details of his body collapsing from the inside out were presented to him. Xie Junping didn't know where this feeling came from, but his psychological defenses had already collapsed. He couldn't help but scream again, but this time no one stopped him. After yelling for an unknown amount of time, Xie Junping finally exhausted all his emotions and stamina. Only then did he realize that he was still suspended in midair. He did not get better, nor did he get worse. The shock wave came suddenly and left just as abruptly. A cool breeze blew again, but Xie Junping had already collapsed. Her fingers were barely able to rest on Luonan's wrist. The sensation of touch and whatnot were all blurred amidst the trembling. It was as if her entire being was living in a nightmare. The worst part was that Luonan, who controlled his fate, was lying there with an ugly expression on his face. His gaze, which had always been extremely calm and resolute, was actually out of focus. His palms were clammy and they seemed to be trembling. Xie Junping was about to cry. Hey, are you okay? Luonan didn't respond. Instead he closed his eyes. Sweat slid out from the depths of his hair and dripped down. Xie Junping finally confirmed that Luonan's current condition was extremely bad. It would be very hard for him to make any more movements. If he fell like this, he would not be able to rest in peace. It was all because of that damned, what was it again, the explosion? Xie Junping couldn't figure out what the powerful impact was, but he didn't have time to think too much about it. He forced himself to raise his voice. Steady, I'll call the police immediately. Luonan's eyelids twitched, then he opened them with difficulty. He swept his gaze across Xie Junping's face and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Look at your car. Don't worry about it for now. Look down. Xie Junping hesitated for a moment. Finally, he resisted the dizziness and fear and looked down. Then he saw the extremely cool silhouette of the Phantom. It was less than 10 meters below him. The Phantom flying car, which was priced at 500 million, naturally had its extraordinary points. In addition to being able to fly on magnetic rails and superconducting roads like ordinary flying cars, it also had suspension braking functions in case of emergency. Therefore, after falling from the viaduct, the flying car did not directly land on the ground and smash into pieces. Instead, it automatically activated its levitation function and slowly ascended, looking for a docking magnetic track. Other than a few dents caused by the falling rocks, there was no other damage. This was a lifesaver. Xie Junping was completely awakened. He hurriedly issued an order for the flying car to move over and make a foothold for him. 1 minute later, the danger was averted. After escaping from death, Xie Junping did not have the strength to speak. He simply treated his wounds and sat in the driver's seat, his whole body limp. Luonan sat back in the car after a while. He had thrown the loose-leaf notebook on the ground in order to free up his hands when he had to save her. Naturally, he had to pick it up. Luonan closed his eyes as soon as he returned to his seat. His body was sweating profusely. He had consumed far too much of his physical strength and energy before. Only when he found the notebook did his body and mind relax. Xie Junping stared blankly for a while before finally remembering what he needed to do. Things seemed to have started anticlimactic, but if Luonan hadn't been cool-headed the entire time and pulled him up at the most critical moment, Xie Junping would have become the most sullen member of the Honor Society of Acumen College. This was without a doubt a life-saving grace. Xie Junping turned his head and was about to express his thanks when a buzzing sound rang in his ear. The micro-headphones buried in his ears started working again. Ying was shouting, "Hey Yang Hu. Are you okay?" The corner of Xie Junping's mouth twitched. He was driven by some intense emotions. He didn't care what Luonan would think when he heard this. He just roared out, "Yang, your sister. Who, your mom?" The other side was silent for a moment before the voice continued to transmit back. It was no longer brash, but it didn't contain any anger either. "All right then, young Xie. I don't care what your current situation is. You must leave that position immediately. According to our observations 2 minutes ago, an intense shock occurred approximately 2 kilometers northwest of you, 1 kilometer underground. The energy was equivalent to a small nuclear bomb explosion. It formed an electromagnetic storm. As for whether or not the ionizing radiation has exceeded the limit, it's really hard to say." A nuclear bomb? Xie Junping's emotions were instantly suppressed. He finally understood why all his portable electronic devices had malfunctioned before. He checked whether or not the car doors and windows were closed in a flurry. Then he turned on the detection device, but nothing happened several seconds later. "Nothing. It doesn't show up here." "Then you still need to leave quickly. Don't tell me you want to stay there and help the police make a statement?" Ying gave him a new coordinate as she spoke. Xie Junping cursed as he started the flying car. "Wasn't it an earthquake? Wasn't it an earthquake? It's quite regretful. We can't find a case of an earthquake that only affects a range of 12 square kilometers, yet has an intensity of over 9. Therefore, I'd rather believe that this was an accident, and a disaster level 1 at that." As Ying analyzed the situation, she also raised a suggestion. "In addition, it's best if you immediately return to Mengzhong. Because a minute ago, another earthquake occurred there. It's magnitude 5. It's real. I'm afraid those colleagues of yours are looking for you everywhere." Xie Junping didn't even have the strength to curse. Ying continued, "I've already overstepped my authority and asked your dad's company for a high-altitude flying shuttle. It'll arrive in 90 seconds. It can basically guarantee that you'll return to Mengzhong within 20 minutes. Love, go little, say, Netku." The facts proved that Ying's calculations were extremely accurate. Their conversation had just ended when the phantom flying car had already arrived at the coordinates given by Ying. This was the middle landing platform of a connected high-rise building. Because it was outside the 12 square kilometer range, this place could still be considered relatively peaceful. Only a portion of the glass had been shattered, and the cleaning robots were currently cleaning. A hummingbird flying shuttle had just arrived. With a rumble, it landed on the platform. Xie Junping stared at the flying shuttle, somewhat absent-minded. He patted his face, forced himself to rouse his spirits and walked out of the car. He walked a few steps before suddenly turning his head. "Words cannot express my gratitude for this great favor. Junior, I will remember this favor. Your current situation isn't too good. I'll leave this car with you. Go to the hospital and get checked out. I'll contact you again later." As he spoke, he handed over the control authority of the phantom flying car to Luonan. This way, Luonan could rely on his own wristband to carry out basic control. Luonan knew that Xie Junping had just taken a trip to the gates of hell. His mind was in a state of chaos. It was already quite rare for him to be able to think of this. Luonan didn't say anything more and nodded in acceptance. Xie Junping bowed once more and jogged aboard the plane. Soon, the flying shuttle soared into the sky, flying straight into the depths of the clouds. The landing pad regained its tranquility. Luonan took a few deep breaths, straightened his back and sat up straight. He extended his arm forward to grab the energy drink on the control panel. But this single action exhausted nearly all of his strength. He leaned back heavily. He took a deep breath and spoke in a low voice, "Close the door." The beautiful butterfly door of the Phantom closed up, forming an enclosed space within the car. Luonan didn't even need to sit in the driver's seat. All he needed to do was set the route to the school. The highly intelligent Phantom flying car would naturally be able to send him to the station. However, the command Luonan issued had nothing to do with the school. Return. The flying car turned around and merged into the self-driving track. Luonan used voice control as before to open the makeup mirror in the car. The AI sprayed out a fine mist of water in a very human-like manner. The lukewarm water vapor pounced on his face. It should have been a comfortable sensation, but it was like countless fine blades scraping across his face. Luonan's entire body twitched. He looked at the makeup mirror once more. His face was ashen and devoid of light. He was simply a terminally ill patient who was beyond cure. Luonan grinned and tried to unscrew the cap of the energy drink. But his fingers didn't have the strength. They were sore and painful. He failed 5 or 6 times before succeeding. He fished out a military energy bar from his pocket, tore open the packaging and swallowed it down with the drink. His entire body shivered a few times, but a wave of warmth spread from his abdomen to his limbs and bones. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves interacted with each other as the external nutrients entered his body. The digestive and blood circulatory systems opposed and harmonized with each other. Energy was rapidly transmitted to every organ and muscle tissue of the body. This was the basic mechanism of the human body's operation. It was established on the foundation of the skeleton and fleshly body. It had been passed down and evolved over countless generations to form its current appearance. However, Luonan's operating mechanism was similar to other people's, but his absorption and digestion efficiency was 5 to 10 times greater. The color of his face rapidly turned for the better in the makeup mirror. In a short few seconds, his face was no different from normal. This efficiency was the result of his 5 years of painstaking research in accordance with his grandfather's notes and related theories. The core concept of his grandfather's theories was known as formatting. This theoretical system used an almost primitive philosophical method to roughly divide the heaven, earth, the universe and all things in the world into 3 levels: self, society, heaven and earth. Each level had its own special formatting to express the core connotation of its existence, operation and life and death. Complex influences and connections were occurring between each level at all times. From Luonan's perspective, his grandfather's deep and heavy theories were far from something someone his age could comprehend by relying on an experiment notebook. Right now he could only focus on the basics. He could focus on the adjustments and molding of his self-formatting. Within his grandfather's theories, the self-formatting was the core of everything. It was a cornerstone that had to undergo perpetual evolution in order to bear the weight of heaven and earth and the social formatting. Realizing the potential of the human body and possessing supernatural strength were the basic prerequisites for evolution. For this reason, Luonan had followed the experimental records of his grandfather's notes for the past 5 years. He used the stimulation of drugs to gradually transform his body's nervous system. With this as the central axis, he affected every organ in the body and adjusted their operating mechanisms in order to form a qualitative change. Currently, Luonan's self-formatting was still in the early stages. His grandfather's notes called it the vessel. Its main function was to coordinate the organs and systems of the entire body. It could digest food and nutrients. It could contain and store energy. It could even nourish the mind. It allowed a person's instincts to gradually adapt to the new environment and make appropriate reactions. Luonan gradually possessed a few abilities following the basic formation of the vessel's structure. For example, he could strengthen his digestion, absorption, and recovery abilities as a big eater. He could also become a hypnotist, which was similar to mental communication. He had previously used it to drive away the crows. Today he used it on Xie Junping. The results were pretty good. Of course, these abilities were just a bonus. The true value lay in the transformation of the self-formatting itself. Correspondingly, any factor that could affect the self-formatting and destroy the structure of the vessel could not be treated lightly. Luonan gazed at the rapidly moving buildings and pedestrians outside the car window. His eyebrows were locked from beginning to end. Finally, the car's AI popped out a notification. The magnetic track ahead is damaged. Switching routes. The flying car arrived at the head of the broken viaduct. There was still some distance between it and the place where Luonan and Xie Junping had encountered danger. However, the front was already sealed off and there was a crowd of hurriedly rushing media reporters. It was very hard to get closer. The scope of the earthquake's influence was roughly bounded by the viaduct. Looking west from the viaduct, whether it was the naked eye or the scanning image of the car's AI, it was a scene of devastation that made one's heart palpitate. 200-story buildings had collapsed near the epicenter of the earthquake. Ruins rose up and dust flew into the air. Flames flickered within the pervading turbid fog. It was simply a reenactment of the scene of missiles sweeping the earth from the Third World War. And if one looked east from the viaduct, the metropolis would display its flourishing appearance to its heart's content. Powerful impact, limited distance. If this was an earthquake, then Luonan could only sneer. His upper body straightened, and his gaze passed through the car window to cast at the ruins in the distance. Combined with the environment of the scene of the incident flashed back. He issued another command, bringing up the automatically recorded image of the car's AI. He had to praise the high end of the phantom flying car. Its full-angle high-definition recording method preserved the greatest amount of detail. Luo Nan chose the time when he and Xie Junping were suspended at the head of the broken bridge. At that time they had just caught a breath from the crisis of the broken bridge. The explosive impact came rumbling over, nearly consigning them to eternal damnation. Luo Nan turned on the virtual function for the sake of grasping the situation at that time. The car window immediately sealed off the outside light, and the projection equipment emitted layers of light and shadow, filling the car. Luo Nan seemed to have returned to the moment of crisis when the angle was adjusted. At that time he had dragged Xie Junping to face the epicenter of the earthquake. The angle was quite right. Flames erupted between the buildings when the explosive impact rang out, and the air rippled like water. Then it was like this. The corners of Luo Nan's eyes twitched. He wanted to issue an order, but he held back and let the image continue to play. Luo Nan could see that every frame of the image was full of color. They were linked to each other, forming a complete and flawless chain. No flaws could be found. Luo Nan replayed the image when Xie Junping stood in front of the car. The result was the same. He didn't waste any more time. He flipped open his notebook and pondered for a bit. The tip of his electronic pen fell onto the flexible e-ink screen, sketching out exquisite lines of varying shades. The lines were constructed layer by layer, and an outline was soon formed. It was a blurry shadow. It had a slight humanoid shape, but there were many inhuman features. Moreover, there was a lack of restraint in the flexion of its limbs. Combined with the shadow background, the head was merely a dozen or so crisscrossed fine lines. The face was not visible, but it still revealed a ruthless and evil aura. Luo Nan stopped writing. He thought for a bit and made some slight modifications. The outer region of the shadow warped even more fiercely under the somewhat exaggerated tip of the pen. It was as if it was burning. In this way it was simply like a demon from hell. Its body was wrapped in flames and poisonous flames, and it descended upon the world once more. Luo Nan looked directly at the screen under the faint illumination of the light. His heart actually palpitated slightly. It was as if the burning wraith was about to jump out from the flexible e-ink screen in the next moment. Chapter 6. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Luonan gazed at it for a long time. He determined that there were no areas that needed to be added or deleted. Then he did some simple 3D processing on the completed sketch and transferred it into the car's AI database. Then he used the image editing function to import his own work into the video recording. Love Go, small, say, Netku. The Phantom Flying Car's AI was admittedly heaven-defying, but this kind of professional image stitching still required professional software processing. It was done on the spot and it was a completely different style. It seemed rather strange. But from Luonan's perspective, this inferior spliced image was the most consistent with his memories. In that instant, Luonan could clearly see an enormous demonic shadow emerge from within the exploding flames. It was over 100 meters tall, and it roared furiously within the collapsed ruins and dust. The impact of the roaring explosion was like a heavy punch or a giant wheel rolling over. So much so that Luonan felt his internal organs deform. The flesh and blood of his entire body emitted explosive sounds. The air was filled with the stench of blood and death. For a moment he really thought it was over. This was what he saw and what he felt, the whole picture. The real world wasn't a fantasy movie. Luonan knew that what he saw and heard was far too bizarre. Therefore he returned to the scene of the incident and compared it to the environment at the scene. He watched the video replay and observed the reaction of the surrounding area. As for the result, it was plain normal and not at all surprising. Was it an illusion? Luonan slowly flexed and extended his fingers. He closed his eyes, adjusted his breathing, and silently chanted the 16-word mantra. The visualization diagram appeared in the void. The tetrahedron, its inscribed sphere, and its circumscribed sphere slowly rotated. The first few laps were slightly awkward, but he slowly regained his fluency. Illusion. That wasn't how the visualization diagram worked. The visualization showed that the vessel was slightly damaged, but it was rapidly recovering. Many years of marathon-style long-distance running training did not give Luonan a particularly strong physique. Instead, it bestowed him with outstanding toughness and recovery ability. It wasn't a big problem, but Luonan cared a lot about it. Actually, Luonan already had an answer within his own logic, but he didn't rush to a conclusion. After pondering for a moment, he gave the AI an order and asked for a copy of the environmental data collected at that time. Soon, a list of relevant information appeared. At the time of the incident, the initial earthquake phase had passed. The air pressure in the surrounding area was 104 kilopascals, which was basically the same as the standard atmospheric pressure. The sound of the explosion was close to 90 decibels, which was not enough to damage one's hearing. The instantaneous wind speed at the location of the incident was 44 kilometers per hour, which was equivalent to a Category 6 wind. Other than that, the temperature, humidity, radiation, and other data were all within the normal range. From the data alone, it was just a normal, slightly noisy, windy day. How could such an environment scare the two men out of their wits? Was this a joke? One more thing. Luonan used his finger to mark the distance on the analysis video. The distance between the broken bridge and the epicenter of the earthquake is 9 kilometers in a straight line. The sound wave transmission should be delayed for around 8 seconds. But in reality? The cold data was more authoritative than memories, and it was even more unbelievable. It showed that the time when the Phantom received the powerful sound wave vibration was 7 milliseconds before the eruption of flames. The sound overtook the light. Based on common sense, this was obviously absurd. The source of the explosion and fire was torn into two in front of the data. At this point, a clear contradiction appeared between the fire and the explosion. Between the explosion and the human body's reaction. Luonan raised his head, no longer looking at any images or videos. He leaned heavily against the back of his chair. Illusion? Bullshit illusion. There was clearly a power in the unseen world, a strange power that interfered with the connection between all sides. It filled in what was originally a blank area. The burning wraith was the representation of this power. This was unscientific. Luonan wanted it to be unscientific. The formatting theory established by his grandfather had entered the realm of metaphysics from the very beginning. Luonan was close to fanaticism towards his grandfather's theory in terms of emotions. He could even place it on an equal footing with his life. But he was unable to find a clear reference based on his current results. Even if Luonan's methods as a glutton king and a hypnotist had already surpassed the limits of a normal person, the level of his ability did not possess decisive qualities. At the very least, he had not reached the level of a qualitative change. What was a qualitative change in the self-formatting? What was the standard for a qualitative change? If it was a so-called supernatural power, then what was its manifestation? Luo Nan was unable to find an answer within his grandfather's complex and messy experimental records. He had shut himself off and cultivated for the past 5 years, talking to himself. It looked like he was advancing step by step, but he was unable to solve the problem of a standard. And now a reference object had appeared. The blood pumped out from his heart was as hot as magma, but Luo Nan could only take a deep breath in the end. His 10 fingers propped up the notebook and he lightly supported his chin, restraining the throbbing of his body and heart. It wasn't time to celebrate yet. Only the tip of the iceberg had been revealed by this power. It looked like it could return to the world's dark screen at any time. There was still a lot of work he needed to do. The car's AI had completed its route switch at this time. It switched to a detour. However, the destruction of a dozen square kilometers of area had caused quite a bit of an impact on the city's traffic. Even though it was early in the morning, many layers of air traffic were temporarily shut down. Traffic began to appear slightly congested, making it impossible for the car to increase its speed. Luo Nan deleted the data and records automatically stored by the AI to avoid exposing the information of the burning wraith and causing unexpected complications. Then he turned on the news channel and searched for reports related to the earthquake. Most of the media were still in the SMS broadcast stage due to the short interval. Only the Star-Associated Press displayed the arrogance of a world-class media. They promptly purchased the aerial footage of the surveillance drones in the vicinity of the incident. They combined it with satellite imagery to capture first-hand information. This video, which wasn't even 2 minutes long, had already been pushed to the top of social media, gaining more and more attention. Looking at the aerial footage made it even clearer that the viaduct was really just the periphery. As for the epicenter of the earthquake, it had already completely caved in. The enormous amount of rubble was still unable to fill up the caved-in area. An enormous crater was exposed. Deep blue lightning was still leaping within. It was exceptionally eye-catching under the dusky light of the sky. Love go, Smaltz say, Netku, what was the situation in the enormous crater? How many casualties were there? Not a single media outlet had a definite report. The municipal government and the police began to intervene at this time, guiding traffic on the periphery. The cleanup and rescue work had yet to officially begin, but transport planes had already appeared in the sky. They began to airdrop all kinds of engineering robots. Comparatively speaking, the government's response was already extremely fast. At the very least, it far exceeded their average level. The speed of the flying car grew slower and slower. The police conducted a few inspections of the passing cars as they guided the traffic. It was unknown what sort of standard this was, but it seemed to be a routine matter. Luo Nan hit the jackpot. A police officer on the side of the road indicated for him to stop the car. He waited for the car window to roll down before making a request. Sir, please turn off the car's radar and related equipment in order to avoid interfering with the search and rescue work. Luo Nan suddenly understood and was very cooperative. He issued an order right in front of the police officer to turn off the relevant system functions. The police waved his hand to let him pass. But the temporary guide bar in front suddenly closed up just as the car began to move. The police caught up 2 steps and signaled for him to stop the car once more. However, this order wasn't just directed at Luo Nan. It included all the cars on the road. There was an impatient person who shouted loudly, "What's going on?" Temporary transfer of rescue equipment. The traffic near the scene is temporarily sealed. Please be patient, everyone. This police officer was around 40 years old. He looked to have a calm temperament and an amiable attitude. However, there really wasn't anyone who dared to explode in front of him. This was because this was a standard special anti-riot police. He wore a defensive combat suit, and with the support of his exoskeleton armor, he was over 2 meters tall. He had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He was completely capable of lifting up a 1-ton flying car and throwing it across the road. Equipment? There had just been a wave of airdrops. If they were to come again, the area of the accident would probably not be able to be expanded. Luo Nan raised his head to look at the sky. The color of the sky was gradually brightening, and his field of vision expanded. There was indeed a medium-sized transport ship hovering in the air. It seemed to be from the military, but he didn't see any equipment being dropped down. The situation is currently changing. Within the news channel, the senior on-site reporter of the Star-Associated Press took a bird's-eye view of the area of the accident from a helicopter. He described the current situation. The surrounding congestion situation is getting more serious. There are more and more parked cars. And from the looks of things, the government and the police aren't putting their energy into clearing the traffic. On the contrary, the police's control measures are becoming stricter. The area of lockdown is constantly expanding. The car owners who were stuck on the road would certainly resonate with this report. Most of the surrounding roads had already been turned into parking lots. The positions of many cars hadn't changed at all for over 10 minutes. The special anti-riot police's inspections were even stricter. Some of the cars that had just been inspected had to be inspected again. Luonan was much calmer compared to the complaints of the other car owners. His current mission was to gather relevant information. Lingering around the area of the accident for a while was exactly what he wanted. He switched between several news channels in search of valuable information. At the same time, he cast his gaze towards the social media, the forums he frequented, and so on. He browsed the web as he watched the news. The car's AI, flexible e-ink screen, and even his wristband were all mobilized. He was extremely busy, but he didn't have any leads for the time being. Less than half an hour had passed since the incident, and the various media outlets hadn't produced any in-depth reports. The social media were mostly filled with rumors. It was far too difficult to sift out useful information from within. The information still needs to fly for a while? Luonan shook his head. His fingers swiped across the flexible screen, and he subconsciously clicked on a certain icon. The interface opened, revealing a familiar dark background and a sparse arrangement of stars. It was none other than the Secret Star forum that he logged in the most often. From Luonan's perspective, the Secret Star forum was a source of goods. For the sake of safety, he never spoke in the public forum. At most, he would browse a few topics that he was interested in. The niche professional forum was slow to react to breaking news, and it was very hard to form a heated discussion. There wasn't much meaning in gathering information here. He entered purely out of habit. The hot topic that was pushed to the main interface today didn't seem to have any news value. The title was Collective Nightmare, Psychic Wave Release. It was a typical style of the mystic arts. Luonan wasn't interested in this topic. Now that he had some free time, he pondered about sending a private message to the internal forum's moderator, attempting to unblock his account ahead of time. Luonan spent a few minutes choosing his words. When he exited the private message interface, he saw that the number of discussion pages for the hot topic had exploded by several times on the main page. The bright star effect had already been activated. The topic interface was pulled out and it turned into a blazing star. And at this time, perhaps a moderator felt that the original title wasn't directional enough, so he made some changes. The title flashed and it became Xia City's R&D District Earthquake Nightmare Discussion Thread. Open merge. Luonan was surprised and he clicked on it in the first moment. The main post's content was very simple. According to the post owner U-Spirit, he was a resident of Xia City who lived near the R&D district. He was sleeping when the earthquake occurred. He had a dream while he was half asleep. In the dream, his entire body was engulfed in flames. He heard a tremendous roar, and the shockwaves were like a giant wheel that crushed his entire body. It was like a ghost pressing down on him. It wouldn't have been a big deal if that was all. The key was that when U-Spirit woke up, his wife next to him woke up with a fright as well. The two of them actually had the same dream just now. Every detail was extremely similar. It was like they had watched a horror movie together. U-Spirit posted this experience on the forum. He himself didn't think much of it. No one paid attention to it. He simply made a live broadcast of the earthquake news in the post. But he never expected that someone would open a new topic in a short few minutes. They talked about the earthquake nightmare. The content of the dream was practically identical to U-Spirit's description. Afterwards, people followed up one after another. Some replied in the post and some opened new posts. In the end, the early morning Secret Star forum exploded into a huge discussion. Then again, there was a limit to how popular a niche forum could be. Luonan skimmed 10 lines at a glance. He quickly scanned through the discussion content of the post, and he felt that he hadn't had enough yet. There are only 2 or 3 examples of true personal experience. No matter how small the Secret Star forum was, its members came from all over the world. There were over 70,000 registered IDs. Divided by 88, there were less than 1,000 people. There were even fewer people living near the R&D district. There were also some people who recognized this point. They began to import relevant information from mainstream communities and social media. Things were easier with more people. The information that Luonan couldn't find with great difficulty was presented in a blowout fashion under the collective search of over 1,000 people. Only now did many people realize that the topic of Xia City's collective nightmare had already formed an undercurrent on the internet. Moreover, the momentum was growing stronger and stronger. The atmosphere of discussion on the Secret Star forum became even more heated. Even though the moderator had already established the rule of opening new posts, there were still people endlessly opening new topics. They also brought related topics in depth. There was an ID called Historical Data Shredder, who opened a new post. He established a statistical chart for this incident. He imported all the relevant examples on the internet into it and updated it endlessly. Soon, the bright star effect was stimulated. Luonan felt that his words were meaningful. The data was organized extremely well. You can see from the diagram that the nightmare psychic wave's range of influence reaches a maximum of 300 kilometers. It covers the entire city of Xia. With the area of the incident as the center, I call it the core area. There are over 20 examples on the internet right now, and it doesn't matter if the people involved are asleep or awake. Historical Data Shredder sorted out over 50 effective examples in total. Half of them were in the core area. As for the areas outside the core area, the density of the examples dropped substantially. The further the distance, the rarer the examples were. It was very hard to verify. However, Historical Data Shredder claimed that according to his understanding, a considerable portion of the sensors outside the core area were people who were publicly recognized as having cultivated. He expressed that he would constantly update the relevant data and hoped to receive everyone's help. Later, Yuling, who first posted the thread, replied. She said that she would be taking her wife to the hospital for a checkup in a moment. She would post the results on the forum, attracting a wave of waiting voices. Luonan lightly pinched his chin. Then he used his wristband to contact the school's medical department. He made an appointment for a physical examination. He was going to compare the results of the Yuling couple's examination. Bang 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 bang. A discordant noise suddenly entered Luonan's ears. There was a forceful knock on the driver's side of the car window. Luonan was stupefied. It was during this pause that the person outside directly stomped the car door. A sharp voice followed. Even the soundproof car body was unable to block it. Xie Junping, come out. Chapter 7. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Shoan.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. The phantom screeched in alarm. Not only did this not deter the person outside the car, but it made her even more aggressive. She kicked the car several times in a row. Bastard, what do you mean by leaving me behind? Luonan looked out of the car and his eyebrows jumped. Lovego, small say, Netko. What he saw was a raised snow-white thigh and the hem of the skirt that was almost torn. His gaze moved upwards and swept across the face of the person who had just arrived. After a brief moment of recollection, he was able to identify the person. It was Long Legs. Okay, this woman was called Lian Yu. She also participated in the club promotion event on the 24th. She was the representative of the student council. In the wee hours of the morning, it was this man who was hugging Xie Junping and was almost dragged into the car. They did not care about the sharp alarm at all. When she was compared to Xie Junping's political life as a drum, she was abandoned like an old nightclub-style rhythm. Luonan wasn't a moral judge. The noise, he was disinclined to judge anything, and he didn't want to get tangled up with her. He turned into a gigolo to press down the window and responded simply, "Even the thief doesn't steal the car. Senior Xie is not here. It's shameful for old Xie to lose his car." Senior Lian? Lian Yu stared blankly at the empty driver's seat. In the chaos, someone really tried to open the trunk, but how could he open it? Instead, he was still in the butt by his companion and rolled under the car. She swept her gaze over Luonan's face twice before her figure suddenly left through the car window. Though Luonan had been caught off guard by Lian's car window was forcefully knocked on. His reactions were fast. Luonan shook his head and lowered the car from the back of the chair when he grabbed onto that in the next moment, two hands with manicured nails would reach in and grab him by the collar. And lost her balance. They used all their strength to drag him out of the car window. The two faces came close in an instant. Catch the thief. Right now, Lian Yu still had her nightclub-style makeup on. The surrounding facial features were all the more previously been three-dimensional because of the long-legged beauty angrily kicking a luxury car. The highlighter powder. Now that there was a show to watch, their hearts were itching like a cat. He saw the woman's swollen outline, eager to take action, as well as the densely interweaving heterochromatic veins in the depths of her eyes. Than them. Adding in the reaction of the muscles under his fingertips, out of the row of luxury cars at the back and swarmed as well as her group of crazy companions. Also not only did they have a hangover, he must have ended his more or less taken drugs during the party on his way back. This didn't count for much in the circle of rich kids, but they had never thought about the trouble surrounding car owners did not dare to get close. What kind of people when there was an experienced police officer in the vicinity? Young people first squeezed toward the window, relying on when they realized that the narrow space was no longer accommodating more people. They screamed and absolutely didn't want to be implicated by this car that was worth 500 million. He pushed Lianyu away, but before he could think of a way to handle this, the middle-aged police officer walked back while talking to someone. The gaze he cast over grew increasingly vigilant. He even placed his hand on the firing position of his weapon. And at this time the car's AI emitted a warning sound once more. It was completely different from before. Attention. Receiving multiple methods of scanning. There is a risk of exposing your privacy. Activation recommended. The warning hadn't ended yet when a buzzing sound rang out. Dozens of small vigilante drones crossed over the congested car formation. They shuttled back and forth in the air above this area. An ice-cold mechanical voice transmitted down, "All non-police personnel on the road, immediately get down with your hands on your head. You have already violated the provisions of Article 16, Section 5 of the Emergency State of Public Order Law. You shall receive an inspection." I repeat. The group of youngsters stared blankly at the small drones fluttering in the air like bats. The clamorous and chaotic atmosphere immediately dissipated by a large half. However, not everyone was able to maintain a basic level of sobriety. There was a warrior, who raised his middle finger towards the flock of bats in the sky. "Police dogs, get out of the way." What responded to him was a throbbing electric flame. The warrior didn't even let out a grunt. His large face fell to the ground, emitting a muffled sound that caused people's hearts to tremble. The surroundings of the phantom flying car immediately emptied out. As long as they still had a brain, they immediately obediently got down on the ground with their hands on their heads. Even if there were a few who were numb, they were forcefully pulled down by their companions. There was no way to reason with the vigilante drones, right? Society had always been quite critical of AI police enforcement. They said that they had no sense of gravity and that it was easy to cause accidents. But when faced with a chaotic scene, the publicly accepted and most efficient method was still the drone cleansing. This method could eliminate human factors to the greatest extent and make it easier for all sides to explain. This group of well-trained rich second generations had long since understood that their special privileges would only be effective against living people. A wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. At most they would go to the police station. Otherwise, what was the point of raising a lawyer for? Outside the car window, Lianyu was also lying on the ground. Luo Nan had obtained peace and quiet, but this kind of peace and quiet wasn't what he wanted. The middle-aged policeman arrived by the side of the car. The youngsters on the ground were all quite obedient. At most, they would carefully shift their positions, afraid that the heavy exoskeleton armor would step on their heads or something. However, there were some people who firmly remembered the policeman's face. They swore to teach him a lesson in the future. The middle-aged policeman didn't pay attention to the careful thoughts of the youngsters on the ground. He stood by the car window and stared at Luo Nan. He also scanned the situation inside the car. The car's AI was still issuing a warning of privacy exposure. Luo Nan found it noisy and simply turned it off. He was very clear that the so-called multiple methods of scanning was most likely the work of this police officer's equipment. Luo Nan's heart was calm. He took the initiative to ask, "Officer, what's the matter?" Since Luo Nan cooperated, the middle-aged policeman followed the rules. He saluted Luo Nan and showed his identification. The identification showed that his name was Shui Weiluan. He was actually over 50 years old. It really couldn't be seen from his appearance. The negotiation between the two had been quite peaceful up until now. But this kind of atmosphere immediately collapsed when Officer Shui requested Luo Nan to open the trunk. Officer Shui grabbed a translucent box from the trunk. He didn't say anything more to Luo Nan. He simply opened the box. His armored fingers displayed astonishing nimbleness. Soon he saw the small sealed bottles within the box. He unscrewed one of the bottles and took out a capsule-shaped pill from within. He rubbed it lightly and specks of white powder sprinkled out. The red light of Officer Shui's waist-mounted scanner flashed. He turned his head to stare at Luo Nan with an unfriendly expression. The corners of Luo Nan's eyes twitched. His many years of experimental experience made him especially sensitive to certain drugs. He instantly realized the troublesome situation before him. Xie Junping, this troublemaker. Another absurd thought immediately popped into his mind. Perhaps he could get a channel from Xie Junping in the future? Xie Junping sneezed again. The tip of his nose glowed red. He knew that this was certainly the result of the resentment virus for many people. He caught a cold and was badly battered. He brought it all on himself. It wasn't easy for him to settle things with Meng Zhong for the time being. Then the unforeseen event in Xia City nearly scared him to the point of pissing his pants. There was still a bottle of True Fate in the car. How could he have forgotten? The one who informed Xie Junping of this news was none other than Miss Zhang Yingying of the hidden indigo firm. Right now the two no longer needed to be sneaky. It was fine to directly engage in virtual communication. With the support of AR technology, it was as if the two were conversing face-to-face in a reception room. Xie Junping had always cursed Zhang Yingying as a telephone operator. She did the work of receiving and handling calls in the hidden indigo firm. But he had to admit that this poison-tongued telephone operator was indeed a very eye-catching beauty. Zhang Yingying looked to be only 18 or 19 years old. Her medium short hair casually draped over her shoulders. Her facial features were bright and generous. She had a bit of a boy's aura, but her figure was not that of a boy's at all. It was already autumn. She wore a sleeveless camisole top. Her snow-white shoulders and neck were exposed. Two thin threads intersected above her steaming chest. It was enough to attract the gazes of all men. From the waist down, she wore a short denim skirt. There were many layers of lace decorations. It was extremely cool. Right now her snow-white long legs were propped up high on the boss's table. Her Roman-style strappy sandals swayed left and right. She looked quite casual. The short denim skirt slid down to the base of her legs. But due to the angle, there was no way to take advantage of her. Right now, Xie Junping didn't have any thoughts of taking advantage of her. He paced back and forth in the room, restless and impatient. Everyone knew that low addictive psychotropic drugs were rampant throughout the world. It was simply inconceivable that this stuff wouldn't appear in private parties of the wealthy. But political opinion didn't care about this. As long as you were stupid enough to expose yourself, you would certainly be killed with a hammer. You wouldn't be given the opportunity to explain. In a certain sense, this was even more serious than him sneaking off to attend a party. And then there was the matter of his gang of scoundrels who ignited this fatal issue. Every thread was linked together. The consequences weren't as simple as 1 + 1. Lian Yu, you slut. Li Shueqing, I'll remember you. Lu Tao, you bastard. Xie Junping was like a trapped beast. He let out a mournful wail in an invisible iron cage. Of course, he was even more anxious to know what the situation was over at Xia City. Had he already been implicated? What the hell are you raising lawyers for? Let them go. Zhang Yingying had a troublemaker stay away from me expression of disdain. She showed signs of slacking off. Xie Junping's mind was as clear as a mirror. This little girl was clearly treating him like a sheep again. The problem was that he was panicking in his heart. He could only smile apologetically. These are extraordinary times. It's more reassuring to hire experts like you. Of course the pay is sufficient. Zhang Yingying spread her hands. Then what do you want me to do? Go snatch people from the military transport ship? Military transport ship? Why the military? Xie Junping's voice had changed pitch. Zhang Yingying extended 3 fingers. The government, the military, and Quantum Corporation. This research and development base, at least in name, was built by the cooperation of these 3 parties. Now a nuclear bomb has mysteriously exploded. Nuclear bomb. Xie Junping's face turned green. Don't misunderstand. I'm just making an analogy. In any case, it's more or less the same. In short, no one can accept this result. But what in the world is going on? A natural disaster? A terrorist attack? Zhang Yingying's feet swayed back and forth. She was quite at ease. Right now, all parties want an explanation. Especially the government and the military, these 2 hands-off bosses. In the past, they enjoyed Quantum Corporation's filial piety. But now that something has happened, they discover that they know nothing about the situation in the laboratory. Who knows if this is an accident or a write-off? If we don't participate deeply, how are we going to explain this to the higher-ups? Xie Junping still couldn't understand, but it doesn't go as far as to throw them onto the military ship, does it? That's because you don't understand the gravity of the situation. Zhang Yingying's words smashed half of Xie Junping's soul away. Afterwards, she extended her 5 fingers. This intelligence is worth this much. Xie Junping's face changed color. You're ripping people off. Zhang Yingying laughed. This is because of our long-term cooperative relationship. Otherwise, when we go outside, She flipped her slender white palm over with a very sincere appearance. I accept. Xie Junping's face was ashen, but he still swallowed his anger. Since he was going to spend money, he would spend it all. Giving up halfway was the stupidest way to die. Zhang Yingying blew him a kiss. Relax, it's worth the money. Any intelligence related to the burner is worth the price. Burner? Yeah, I got the information from a reliable source. This is a high-end laboratory that specializes in the research of the burning mechanism. The emphasis is on neuroanatomy. Human body? Living body? Xie Junping couldn't be blamed for letting his imagination run wild. The previous information related to Luo Yuandao had left a deep impression on him. Naturally, he would make associations. Zhang Yingying didn't come to a conclusion. On the project proposal, the experimental subject is written as a mutant. As for the rest, who knows? She paused for a moment and said, but this is all meaningless. The important point is that this laboratory was conducting a large-scale experiment this morning. The energy system was forcefully shut down by someone, causing the experimental body to go out of control. It led to a major accident and disastrous casualties. And the suspect took the opportunity to steal an important experimental prototype. Xie Junping blurted out, Deep Blue Walker? Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes at him. How is that possible? It said that it's a new product developed by Quantum Corporation. It's a drug form. Right now, the surrounding area is under martial law. If it doesn't work, then the entire Xia city will be in chaos for a while. Oh, wait a minute. What does this have to do with them being carried onto the transport ship? Zhang Yingying responded in a relaxed manner. Right now the culprit is on the run. Whoever dares to create chaos won't be polite. Besides, those bastards are standing there. Each and every one of them is an eyesore. Who has the time to screen them one by one? It's better to just capture them in the name of the military. We can deal with them when we have the time. It saves us the trouble of going through the procedures. So that's how it is. *CK. Xie Junping suddenly discovered that he was definitely going to be a sheep's paw. Zhang Yingying had gone around in a big circle. This was tantamount to saying that Luo Nan and the others had encountered the government and the military going crazy. They had been caught in the crossfire. The nature of the matter wasn't as serious as he had imagined. In the end, this was how the 5 digits of information was used. Xie Junping wanted to go up and slap the table. He finally remembered that this was a virtual dialogue room, but his expression was extremely ugly. Zhang Yingying was very clear about his thoughts. She immediately shook her head and sighed. People like you are incurable. If it were your father, he wouldn't even have the time to be grateful. The important thing is the drug. The drug. Do I even need to spell this out? Chapter 8. Geniuses remember in 1 second. Love Go? Talk. Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Chapter 8. Burning with Hunger. Drugs. Drugs. Xie Junping wasn't stupid to the extreme. His mind came around, but his mood only worsened. Quantum Corporation didn't give people a way out. It must be known that the Xie family had a considerable amount of business in the field of the production and sale of cutting-edge drugs. But compared to Quantum Corporation, one of the world's top 3 giants in terms of market value, they were still lacking. Quantum Corporation rapidly rose to prominence after the war. At the beginning of the 90s, they proposed the concept of burners on the basis of archetype formatting theory. They single-handedly created the Deep Blue platform and introduced the Deep Blue Walkers. They changed the mode of war between humans and mutants, immediately reclaiming large amounts of traditional human territory. Just from this point alone, it could be said to be a great company that changed the world. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Quantum Corporation appeared to be working on a weapons platform, but the nature of their research was in fact a major breakthrough in the life sciences. Their accumulation in related fields was absolutely one of the best in the world. Today, this giant of capital was finally extending its tentacles into the cutting-edge pharmaceutical field. The few pharmaceutical companies that the Xie family had a stake in were probably going to panic for a while. But upon careful thought, for any qualified capitalist, obtaining reliable information in advance was absolutely an astonishing amount of wealth. Zhang Yingying crossed her arms and sneered when she saw Xie Junping in a daze. Sheep, is it worth it? It's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Xie Junping's face had always been used to be sold. He laughed mischievously as he lightly slapped his own face. Yingying, you owe me a great favor. I'll remember your kindness for the rest of my life. Zhang Yingying's small face was so tender that water could be squeezed out of it. But she was essentially invulnerable. She didn't even bat an eyelid. Okay. This year's fees will increase by 50%, right? I'll thank you on behalf of the boss. Love Go little say, Neku. Xie Junping immediately became listless. He hastily messed up his words. Alright. Does Quantum Corporation and Luo Nan have a grudge? That archetype formatting theory. Zhang Yingying responded lazily, no matter how wrong Yen Hong is academically, the results he sold to Quantum Corporation are already set in stone. The size of an individual is meaningless when compared to a financial group. Quantum Corporation won't care about these little ants. Don't scare yourself, okay? Xie Junping was not really concerned about this matter, but he thought of another problem. He hemmed and hawed for quite a while before finally opening his mouth. Luo Nan has been brought onto the warship. Do you think he'll? If you're worried that I'll sell you out, just say so. Zhang Yingying sneered, although it's normal to sell you out, from the looks of it there isn't any. According to reliable sources, he hasn't said a word since he was detained. Really? Xie Junping was a bit suspicious. Logically speaking, there was no need for Luo Nan to take the blame for him. Zhang Yingying shrugged. You'll never know what's on the mind of a hero of darkness who wants to leave his name in history. For example, videos. Video? That's right. Your 500 million renminbi phantom is recording the security footage automatically. Do you really think the police won't take it? Ah? Only then did Xie Junping react and his face paled. That. Zhang Yingying sighed. By the time you react, the police's criminal record will have turned to dust. Relax, it's already been deleted. Xie Junping clasped his hands together and expressed his thanks over and over. It's all thanks to your thorough consideration, Yingying. There's no need for me to take credit for someone else's work. This is yet another righteous act of the hero of darkness. Damn. Benevolence. Xie Junping was truly shocked this time. The car was under his name and this was an undeniable fact. As long as Luo Nan cooperated with the police and told the truth, and combined with the recorded video, it would be easy to remove suspicion. However, Luo Nan chose to delete the video and kept his mouth shut, giving Xie Junping leeway. This was a great favor. Xie Junping racked his brains, but he still couldn't understand how Luo Nan was able to do this. In the end he could only sigh, benevolence. Benevolence is unparalleled. Though he said this, Xie Junping was pondering in this instant. Should he push the boat with the current and let the hero of darkness take the blame? Compensation could be discussed later. But after some thought, it didn't matter if his strength took the blame or if he framed Luo Nan. The middle operation would certainly increase, and the uncertainty would increase by a large margin. In the end, the phantom flying car was under his name. It would be hard for him to wash himself clean no matter what. Also, when he thought of Luo Nan and those bewitching pupils, Xie Junping felt an indescribable chill in his heart. He wasn't sure of the bottom line. Yingying, say it. What? Are you thinking of something crooked? No. Nothing of the sort. Xie Junping thought for a bit. It really wasn't good to say those words, so he simply stomped his foot heavily. Forget it. Luo Nan had already gone this far. He couldn't be a coward. He would first fish the person out before anything else. Yep, before this, let the hero of darkness continue to be benevolent. Luo Nan, who was unparalleled in benevolence, was sitting by himself in a corner right now. His back and his body were covered with ice-cold metal plates. There weren't any markings on all four sides. The rough, cold, and hard characteristic of a warship stuck in his mind. Luo Nan quickly digested the mental foreign object, but it wasn't so easy for the others in the same cabin. Each and every one of them had restless appearances. No one would have thought that what was supposed to be a very normal public security incident would actually result in them being brought to a military ship and placed in confinement. In the beginning, this group of rich kids clamored about going through the procedures and hiring a lawyer. But not even a reply was heard after an hour had passed. There were only ice-cold combat robots guarding the outside of the sealed cabin. The bulky anti-riot guns looked panicky. In the end, the dozen or so people could only stare at each other and gradually calm down. Luo Nan's head hung low. His breathing was faintly discernible. It was 8 o'clock in the morning right now. Normally, Luo Nan would already be in the classroom waiting for class to start at this time. And he would certainly have eaten at least 5 portions of breakfast by now. The cost of maintaining the structure of the vessel wasn't cheap. It required a considerable amount of energy. Right now Luo Nan could only eat. He used the most traditional chemical method of humans to convert food into energy in order to replenish his consumption. And he had made a few extra preparations. For example, he carried an energy bar in his pocket. But today's accident had caused him to use up his energy bar early. He had no way to replenish his energy. Luo Nan felt as if a black hole had opened up in his stomach after his usual mealtime. It endlessly squeezed out the energy from his flesh and blood. Under normal circumstances, the feeling of hunger shouldn't be this severe. But Luo Nan had no choice but to pay an extra price for being carried onto the transport ship. Luo Nan was forcibly detained due to the suspicion of illegally carrying banned drugs. Though the police didn't have the leisure to interrogate and deal with him, simple tasks such as urine testing and sampling were forcibly carried out not long after he boarded the ship. This was a procedure that had to be carried out. There was no reason for it. Luo Nan could point to the heavens and swear to the sun. He was 100% not a drug addict. He had never touched the drugs in the box. He was 100% not a member of Xie Juanping's gang of scoundrels. But the problem was that he had injected an entire tube of drugs before leaving the house this morning. The ratio of banned ingredients was absolutely off the charts. Perhaps the amount of banned ingredients in the bodies of all the people present wouldn't even be a fraction of what he had. According to this logic, Luo Nan would really be like yellow mud falling into his pants. He wouldn't be able to explain himself no matter how hard he tried. Because of this, Luo Nan deliberately activated his Appetite King skill the moment the incident occurred. He sped up his body's metabolism with all his might. Time sped up for Luo Nan. Chapter 9. A Genius in 1 Second Remembers Love? Speak, Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Most of the sensitive psychotropic drug ingredients that the police were concerned about had a natural metabolism time of 5 to 10 days. Luo Nan had completed this metabolism process in a short half an hour from the time he was arrested to the time he boarded the ship. Plus, he had to pay attention to the digestion of sensitive ingredients when he concocted the drug. Luo Nan only did a small control of his urinary system when he took samples. A normal urine test could be ignored. As for other test samples such as blood, hair and the like, frankly speaking, Luo Nan wasn't confident. So he didn't open his mouth from the moment he was forcibly detained. He didn't have the slightest intention of dragging Xie Junping into this. Not to mention that it was meaningless, he still needed to rely on that fellow to help him escape. There was more or less a price to pay for choosing this path. Luo Nan's metabolism sped up and his internal organs consumed large amounts of energy. This short hour was equivalent to Luo Nan fasting for over a week. His body fat consumption and muscle decomposition accelerated in order to ensure the supply of nutrients to his brain and nerve center. His neurons were excited and inhibited repeatedly, causing Luonan to feel terrible right now. Pain, numbness, and slight hallucinations endlessly assaulted his senses. Luonan sat motionless on the ice-cold deck of the ship. Actually, every muscle in his body was suffering. They were all twitching subtly. This was the sign of a functional disorder in his nervous system. He closed his eyes and completely ignored the grumbling rich kids around him. He chanted the 16-word mantra. In the beginning he chanted in an extremely fluent manner. A humming sound shook his brain. But the speed of his chanting grew slower and slower. His voice grew lower and lower. In the end, no sound came from between his lips and teeth. There were only short words that gurgled and flowed in his mind. My heart is a prison. My heart is a furnace. My heart is a mirror. My heart is a nation. Luonan's mind gradually gathered along with the flow of his heart. Distracting thoughts were eliminated, and he naturally entered the visualization step. Silver thread-like lines constructed the structure of a tetrahedron, an inscribed sphere and an outer-scribed sphere in the void. It was like some sort of marvelous celestial body. It rotated in solitude within the dark space of the universe. Over the past 5 years, he had been progressing hand in hand with his medicinal carving and chanting and breathing, forming a subtle correspondence between the vessel and the visualized image. Changes in the vessel would immediately affect the operation of the visualization diagram. On the other hand, adjusting the visualization diagram with one's mind could also roughly sort out the structure of the vessel, adjust the rise and fall of qi and blood, and affect the function of the organs. Luonan discovered that the damage to the vessel relied on the former. The accelerated metabolism and control of the urinary system relied on the latter. Of course, the latter was equivalent to interfering with the operation of the autonomic nervous system. It was an act that went against the natural physiology, and the price to pay was to suffer a backlash. Just like at this moment, there were some problems with the operating rhythm of the visualization diagram. Luonan had spent half an hour to accelerate his metabolism. Now he needed at least 3 times the amount of time to recover. Luonan had a certain amount of experience with this. His attitude was correct. In any case, he was imprisoned. He didn't need to think too much about the outside world. He just needed to slowly recuperate and everything would be fine. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that the situation wasn't as simple as it seemed. The visualized image operating in nothingness began to lag, and it was getting worse and worse. It was like a large-scale game running on a low-spec machine. No matter how hard it tried, it couldn't reach the perfect, smooth and full picture quality. Moreover, as the machine overheated, the condition was getting worse. Love gong small sake nekku in the end, even the rhythm of chanting the mantra was affected. It was nearly impossible to continue the visualization. The backlash he suffered was actually this severe? Luonan didn't believe it. He stopped the visualization and muttered to himself for a moment. He adjusted his body and changed his sitting posture. Luonan sat cross-legged, just like a monk or a Taoist who meditated in ancient times. His entire body was firmly fixed on the deck. From the top of his head to the 2 sides, his shoulders, his elbows, and his knees formed 2 perfectly straight diagonal lines. They then connected to the ground, forming a solid pyramid. This pyramid sitting posture was a visualization technique his grandfather had taught him in his early years. It was the visualization diagram on the title page of the notebook. The pyramid-shaped tetrahedron was like the boundary of a limb. The inscribed circle contained the internal organs, the circulation of energy and blood. The circumscribed circle symbolized the external environment of the world. Thus the body and mind were one. The inside and the outside were opposite, and the visualization results were even better. Luonan usually used it to replace sleep when he was resting at night. Now he used it to strengthen the visualization results. He once again silently chanted the mantra and entered a meditative state, smoothly starting the visualization. The silver threads constructed a complete diagram structure, and it began to slowly rotate. At this very moment, Luonan wasn't a spectator, but a participant. The boundary between him and the visualization diagram began to blur as he chanted the mantra. It was as if he had arrived in the boundless darkness. He had transformed into a towering pyramid that rotated in the void. In his daze he felt that he wasn't moving at all. What moved was the squirming internal organs of his flesh and blood. What moved was the seemingly dark nothingness of the outside world. Between movement and motionlessness, the elements of harmony and disharmony were peeled off layer by layer and exposed. What the hell is this? There was clearly a power within the surrounding nothingness and darkness. Its volume wasn't large, but it was very solid. It was like a hand hidden within the darkness. It was always trying to pull the visualization diagram and disturb its stability and balance. Luo Nan tried to grab this hand, but he was completely unable to make sense of the form of existence that was opposite him. His senses grew clearer and clearer, but he was unable to touch it no matter how hard he tried. It was like a mosquito fluttering by one's ear at night. It came and went, making people loathe it. Or to be more precise, this was simply a specter that spiraled around inside and outside of his body. It wantonly devoured the essence of his flesh and blood, leaving him helpless. Stutter? After messing around for so long, it was a freaking virus. Luo Nan tried a few times, but it was hard to deal with it. Instead, his mind was in chaos. Distracting thoughts rose together, and he gradually grew impatient. He had no choice but to withdraw from the fixed space. But when he withdrew from the fixed space, his situation was even worse. Under the urging of his impatient emotions, the various itchiness, pain, and even slight hallucinations that had been produced due to the effects of hunger transformed into turbulent, distracting thoughts. They leaped up from his mind and brazenly counterattacked. He had the momentum to sit on the throne once more. Or it could be said that it was more like a ball of poisonous fire that rolled within his internal organs. Luo Nan's lips and teeth squirmed slightly. What came out was no longer the 16-word mantra. Instead, it was simple and illogical vulgar words. His current state was very bad. He knew it was bad, but he was unable to control it. It was without a doubt that he was in an even worse state. As his mind became unstable, the interference from the outside world was no longer that easy to block. But there were still people who forcefully came up to him. "Hey!" Someone laughed beside his ear. "Kit, are you scared stupid? Or are you deaf?" Luo Nan raised his head slightly. He couldn't even open his eyelids. His current state had consumed far too much of his energy. He was already not too sensitive to the outside world. He was completely unaware of what had happened before, and he had no interest in knowing. However, the other person was unwilling to let him off. "You're so young. Why are you acting so aloof?" Luo Nan finally raised his eyelids to gaze at the person who had come. It just so happened that this person was the only person he recognized in the room. Lian Yu? Chapter 10. Genius 1 second. Remember love go away? Speak, net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Lian Yu had just come back to her senses. In this circle of rich kids, her position was somewhat ambiguous. The reason for this, aside from her family background, was that she was two-timing Xie Junping and her real boyfriend at the same time. Her position was unclear. Because of this, she suffered a wave of cynicism and ridicule when she was thrown off the car by Xie Junping in the morning. It could be said that she was mad with anger. Plus, she had a hangover and other problems. Luo Nan had become a target to vent his anger on the road, causing this incident. Lian Yu's thoughts underwent a subtle change after she calmed down in the detention room. Her anger towards Xie Junping didn't lessen in the slightest, but she had a new plan for Luo Nan. She had been observing Luo Nan all this time. The vast majority of the people in the cramped and noisy detention room were either depressed or noisy. They were full of negative energy from head to toe. Only Luo Nan, this big boy, who looked to be the youngest, sat quietly in the corner from beginning to end. Aside from changing into a strange sitting posture once, there was practically no movement from him. The shadow in the corner gently covered Luo Nan's body, blurring his silhouette and many details. But looking at it as a whole, it was fully coordinated. It was like a mask and cloak at a masquerade ball, dressing up a mysterious and profound character. It seemed to be very tasty. So Lian Yu moved closer to Luo Nan. She observed him at a close distance, with a touch of provocation. Luo Nan's delicate, pretty, and quiet appearance was exactly her cup of tea. If he took revenge on Xie Junping into consideration, then it would be even more interesting. Of course, before this, she first needed to figure out the relationship between Luo Nan and Xie Junping. She needed to figure out why Xie Junping was burning with impatience in the morning and why this little fellow came up when he turned around. Lian Yu's thoughts couldn't be hidden from others. Someone laughed weirdly to the side. "Lian Jiu, he's a vegetarian. You guys can't get together." Vegetarian is also very refreshing. Lian Yu didn't mind people calling her by her nickname at all. Jiu was the title of an imperial concubine in ancient times. Her status was illustrious, and it also had the meaning of charm and beauty. It couldn't be considered a bad name. As for using her beauty to charm people or even the evil intentions of not being the legitimate wife, she naturally disregarded them. Lian Yu herself indeed had a heroic spirit that didn't care about meat or vegetables, and she even had the capital to do so. Her well-defined facial features gave her a bit of a mixed-race look. What was really against the rules was her voluptuous and tall figure. She even purposely wore a burgundy tight-fitting short skirt that accentuated her seductive body parts while also showing off her slender waist and long legs to maximize her charm. Now, in order to keep warm, she borrowed a man's outer robe and put it on. But when she spoke, she habitually gestured with her hands, and the front of the robe opened naturally. Her unbridled snow-white skin and the shadow of her coy figure formed a first-class natural composition. It could simply suck in the eyes of the surrounding men. However, all Luonan felt was irritation and pain. Lian Yu's attitude towards Luonan had completely changed. She wanted to amuse him a bit. She giggled as she went to pat Luonan's shoulder as she spoke. She really didn't use much strength in her slap, but Luonan had already returned to the state he was in when he and Xie Junping had just parted ways. His face hurt from the mist. This slap was simply like an axe chopping down on his shoulder. In an instant, his entire arm and half of his shoulder didn't seem to be his anymore. Luonan's entire face twitched, but Lian Yu only thought that he was nervous. She placed her hand on Luonan's shoulder and didn't let go. She borrowed a bit of strength and seductively bent down. "We're all fellow inmates who have gone through trials and tribulations together. Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" Any other man would enjoy this kind of benefit, but the current Luonan just wanted to smash a fist into her face. "It hurts. It really hurts." Luonan felt as if a fire was burning in his heart. In reality, he had already clenched his fists tightly. But his remaining reason told him that there wasn't any deep hatred involved. It was just the habitual hunting of a carnivorous woman, that's all. Luonan tried to use this to disperse his energy and return to his normal state. He used as flat a tone as possible to reply, "Acumen College. 10th grade. Luonan. It really is my junior. And it's a little fresh meat?" Lian Yu was a bit pleasantly surprised. Right now, she found Luonan more and more pleasing to the eye. His delicate and tender face paired with a cool expression. Yep, and that serious posture of meditation. She couldn't tell if he was angry or shy, but he really was very cute. She couldn't help but want to tease him a bit more deeply. She reached out her hand to touch Luonan's face. Her attitude was too obvious, and this insane benefit release aroused the jealousy of some people. Suddenly a hand reached over and grabbed Luonan's cheeks in a single step. The person was also laughing and giggling, but his fingertips exerted force, directly squeezing Luonan's face until it deformed. "Fresh meat? Fresh." Luonan's heart thumped. His brain didn't work. He completely relied on his body's instincts to forcefully wave his hand and slap away this person's dirty hand. The intense emotions contained in this action were undoubtedly an intense stimulation to this group of alcoholics and drug addicts. The person who reached out his hand was already in a bad mood. He took advantage of the situation to kick over. "Motherfucker, you're being cocky." This kick fiercely stomped onto Luonan's shoulder with enormous strength. Luonan's body leaned to the side and even Lian Yu was pulled askew. The notebook on Luonan's knee slipped down amidst the chaos and was swept away by Lian Yu, who had lost her balance. She slid 2 to 3 meters away. Lian Yu was wearing 10-centimeter high heels. She nearly sprained her ankle in her fluster. She only didn't fall to the ground because she was supporting Luonan. She felt that she was in a sorry state and the anger in her heart suddenly rose. "Li Xueqing, what the hell are you doing?" In the end, an even louder voice roared back, "What the hell am I doing?" Lian Yu was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She jumped 3 feet into the air amidst her shrill cry. Her fingertips, which were covered in manicured nails, greeted Li Xueqing's face. Actually, this kind of fight couldn't happen. Li Xueqing's slip of the tongue had already caused Xie Junping to lose face. If he were to make a move against Lian Yu, he would really have to scratch a few lines on his face. He wouldn't be able to mingle in this circle in the future. He dodged backwards and there would naturally be enough people coming up to stop the fight. This group of rich kids had just suffered a setback in their drive-in prison. They were just about to raise their energy to the breaking point. Now that they could join in the fun, each and every one of them courageously scrambled to be the first. Let's not talk about whether they were in the right or not. It would be good if they could take advantage of a beauty. Lian Yu had already been hugged by 3 or 4 big men before she could even rush up. Words of persuasion left and words of persuasion right. Her entire body had eaten quite a bit of hands of justice from head to toe. She was so angry that her charming face was ashen. She flashed her high heels. No matter who it was, she gave them a heavy kick. She kicked the group of men until they scattered. In the end, the 2 girls who were acting as flower vases had seen enough of the excitement. They went over to persuade them half truthfully and half falsely. Only then did they manage to pacify them. On the other side, Li Xueqing had extricated himself from the crisis of having his face ruined, but his face was still damaged. He had a belly full of anger that he didn't know where to vent. His eyes darted all around before he finally saw the pretty boy who had caused the crisis. He stood up shakily and went to pick up the dropped notebook as if nothing had happened. *CKU. Li Xueqing didn't even think. He charged over and kicked Luonan's lower back. Chapter 11. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. There were many people to the side and the space was narrow. Li Xueqing didn't use his full strength. He only kicked Luonan to stagger, but Li Xueqing himself nearly slipped and fell. Love go, small sake, Netkahi had finally regained his balance and was about to rush forward again. Luonan suddenly turned around at this time. Strangely enough, when their eyes met, Li Xueqing felt an inexplicable panic in his heart and unconsciously stopped walking. Lianyu had already calmed down. Li Xueqing's actions had attracted everyone's attention. Li Xueqing's actions were obviously inappropriate, but Luonan wasn't a person of this circle. This group of rich kids had no obligation to mediate. Not to mention that there were quite a number of people who were still brooding over the can of destiny in the phantom flying car. Even if there was a 9% chance that Xie Junping was the culprit, as long as there was a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 chance, they would be able to shift their resentment onto Luonan. Everyone looked on with cold eyes. Lianyu, on the other hand, felt the attitude of the group of scoundrels in the circle. It was not good for her to step forward and intervene. With an ashen face, she angrily stood at the side. Of course Li Xueqing knew the attitude of his companions. He really did have the heart to go up again. But he didn't know why, even though Luonan's face was ashen like a corpse and he looked like he could be blown over by the wind, Li Xueqing was unable to take a single step when he looked directly into Luonan's eyes. 1 or 2 seconds wasn't a problem, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds had passed and he still hadn't moved. This was *King battle pose. The surrounding scoundrels had obviously noticed something and were already laughing in a low voice. Li Xueqing felt even more embarrassed. In the past, when it came to this kind of thing, there would naturally be bodyguards and attendants to take care of it. Who the *CK knew that they would feel so uncomfortable when they were on the spot. She couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. She saw that Luonan's notebook was right under her feet, so she simply stomped her foot to vent her anger. She stomped right in the center of the notebook. The thick book instantly caved in, and a faint cracking sound came from between the pages. Across from him, Luonan was suddenly stupefied. Li Xueqing immediately understood when he saw Luonan's expression. His foot had truly stepped into the pit of Luonan's stomach. Li Xueqing immediately felt great pleasure. Even the feeling of cowardice that was wrong dissipated quite a bit. He added more force to his feet, and his heel made a good circle on the notebook. At the same time he drew out his voice, rising and falling rhythmically like an aria. I'm sorry. Li Xueqing's actions were actually very tasteless and degrading, but since they were on the same side, there were quite a few people around who were laughing and jeering. As for how much was helping and how much was mocking, it was up to the person to decide. Li Xueqing's confidence grew with momentum. He raised his hand and pointed at Luonan. Kid? His voice had just left his mouth when his throat suddenly choked up. This was because he saw Luonan walking towards him. The entire cabin was no more than 20 square meters. After more than 10 people were stuffed in, it was already very crowded. The distance between 2 people was really just a matter of 2 steps. Li Xueqing's heart twitched inexplicably. At the same time he met Luonan's eyes once more at a close distance. Luonan's appearance was very delicate and pretty, but his eyes weren't beautiful. At least this was how Li Xueqing saw it. Luonan's pupils were mottled, as if they were flowing with lustrous and dazzling colors. But in the end they were controlled by a gloomy and cold tone. Li Xueqing inexplicably thought back to the strange collection he saw in the private garden of a certain best friend. A mutant that was as bloodthirsty as its life. This savage and ruthless beast was over 5 meters long. It was majestic like a mountain, and it was trapped behind layers upon layers of electrical webs. Its body was covered in cuts and bruises, but Li Xueqing couldn't help but shudder when the beast's eyes stared straight at him. Luonan's physique was naturally unable to compare with the enormous mutant. But the problem was that there was a glass wall that was harder than steel between Li Xueqing and the vicious beast. There was also a high-voltage electrical net and other lethal mechanisms on standby. And now there was nothing at all. Li Xueqing's heartbeat sped up and his pupils dilated. He opened his mouth to shout, but even he himself didn't know what to shout. The problem was that he clearly opened his mouth, but not a single sound came out. Not only that, but his tongue, throat, chest, and all the muscles in his body instantly stiffened. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. His consciousness was clear, but he couldn't get out no matter what. He could only watch helplessly as Luonan walked forward. Luonan extended his arm, and Luonan's 5 fingers lightly clasped onto his throat. It was really just a light touch and he could not feel any strength. But at this moment, the air in his lungs was quickly sucked out, and his nostrils, mouth, and even pores all over his body were forcibly sealed, as if he was wrapped in a thick and airtight plastic film. His internal qi could not flow out, and neither could his external qi enter. He could not even sweat. His heartbeat increased rapidly, but the amount of oxygen in the blood he pumped out continued to drop. The terrifying feeling of suffocation was like an overflowing tide, slowly but surely filling his brain. Li Xueqing desperately wanted to open his mouth, wanted to breathe, wanted to beg for mercy. He used all the strength in his body, but only his eyeballs bulged, almost popping out of their sockets. The color of blood seeped through her vision bit by bit. Her tear ducts were stimulated. She forced herself to cry, but she couldn't wash away the filthy color. The only thoughts in his mind had collapsed, and only the purest desire to survive remained. He was still struggling with great difficulty. Save me. Save me. Someone save me. Li Xueqing himself did not know, but he was actually able to make some sounds. It was the kind of sound where the muscles in his throat were stiff. It was a sharp sound that squeezed out of his throat, a sound that could die at any moment. Woo-woo woo-woo. At the same time his face turned from white to red, from red to purple, from purple to black. His eyeballs had already popped out of their sockets by nearly a centimeter, beginning to reveal large amounts of the whites of his eyes. It was as if his blood and energy would explode in the next moment. Each and every one of the rich kids in the cabin were stupefied on the spot. They were unable to understand the pain Li Xueqing was facing. They only saw Luonan walk over, extend his hand, and choke Li Xueqing's neck. Li Xueqing was completely scared silly. He actually did not resist in the slightest. Luonan looked weak and delicate, but the strength of his hand was terrifyingly great. The current Li Xueqing looked like he could go into shock from suffocation at any moment. He might even die on the spot. No one knew why Li Xueqing was such a coward. But Luonan's ferocious strength was even more frightening. At this very moment, everyone believed that Luonan was really going to strangle Li Xueqing to death. There were also some people who were clear-headed. They felt that Luonan's body movements had a sort of indescribable awkwardness. It was as if he was exerting strength, yet not exerting strength. It was completely out of step with Li Xueqing's pain, so much so that the entire situation was extremely uncoordinated. But this wasn't the most important thing. What truly made people's scalps go numb was Luonan's face. Yes, look at his face. Luonan's face was originally pale and gray like a corpse. But right now there was a drunken red glow that spread and piled up. Excitement, right? Excitement, right? This scene was like an incorporeal whip that lashed at the hearts of the surrounding people. Let's not talk about the feeling of the flesh, but their hearts were twitching. Damn pervert. Homicidal maniac. He hit it so deeply. What are you looking stupidly for? Hold him back. Lian Yu's sharp voice tore through the almost sticky fear. She was the first person to react to the stress. She disregarded everything and charged towards the pile of stiff bodies in front of her. The group of people in front couldn't maintain their balance, especially the one at the very front. How far was he from UCI? A servant in front was about to touch her, and this fellow was a coward. He actually let out a blood-curdling scream. But no matter how unwilling the people in the front row were, the sudden explosion of crowding and chaos still pushed them towards Luonan. The weight of 7 or 8 people piled together. Even though Luonan didn't use his full strength, he still made Luonan stagger. His hand that was stuck to Li Xueqing's throat actually slipped away. This scene gave many people courage. There were people in the very front row who simply screamed, "Ah ah ah." They closed their eyes and opened their arms. It was a completely unreasonable bear hug, rushing to cling to Luonan. With the first came the second. Under the drive of the herd mentality, a large portion of the people rushed forward. The cabin was in chaos for a time. Luonan was pushed away amidst the chaos, but Li Xueqing fell heavily to the ground. He had already sunk into unconsciousness, unconscious. Traces of extreme fear still remained on his face. Things had gotten out of hand. Beep beep beep. A sharp alarm rang. The armed mechanical soldiers that had been there all along were instantly activated. They turned around and pointed their anti-riot guns at the chaotic crowd. Chapter 12. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Show.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. In this arrest operation, although the military police had thrown the person here without any follow-up measures, it did not mean that they had completely given up. In fact, there had always been surveillance cameras in the cabin to monitor everyone's vital signs. It was only when they discovered that Li Xueqing was in a state of shock that they took emergency measures. The armed mechanical soldiers were completely cold and ruthless. They would not care about the cause and effect, right and wrong. They would strictly follow the fixed procedure and open fire with anti-riot guns. The high-voltage pulse covered the entire detention room. Everyone who was standing was the target of the attack. Even Lian Yu and the other girls were not spared. Correspondingly, the electric current penetrated his body. The electric currents formed a closed circuit with the human nervous system, stimulating the muscles and instantly putting them into a state of rigidity. Everyone was completely defenseless and fell to the ground. The chaotic situation was immediately swept away. No, there is one more. Luonan was forcefully controlled by the bunch of rich kids. Some grabbed him by the waist, some hugged him by the legs. Perhaps it was because he had a few more layers of meat shields, but he didn't collapse immediately. He staggered a few steps and finally managed to maintain his balance. His body was half bent and his hands were on his knees. His calves seemed to be trembling and swaying as if he could fall at any time. But even so, Luonan still stood there. He raised his face slightly, and the blood-red color on his face faded a bit. His eyes stared fixedly over the bars of the detention room, staring at the muzzles of the armed mechanical soldiers. The armed mechanical soldiers also coldly locked onto their only target. Just as they were about to attack again, soldiers in combat uniforms rushed in from the door. The person in the lead was a captain officer. Retreat. The voice-controlled command was issued, and the armed mechanical soldiers' electronic eyes immediately turned black. Love, go, small, say, neck. The captain's gaze swept across the room and he said sternly, everyone get on the floor and put your hands behind your head. He didn't say what the consequences would be if he didn't do it, but no one wanted to test the law. Even though the numbness had not completely passed, the group of people were still correcting their postures, each of them more obedient than a lamb. Lian Yu sneakily raised her head and cast her gaze towards Luonan. There should be many people like her who strongly felt that this sinister and ruthless pervert was stubborn to the end and wouldn't obey the captain's orders. But reality left them completely flabbergasted. Luonan crawled down slowly and with great difficulty, but he was extremely obedient. His hands crossed and held the back of his head. Since Luonan had moved a few steps before, he was a bit closer to Lian Yu's position. From Lian Yu's angle, she just happened to see Luonan's face. He seems to be trembling. It can't be that he only understands fear now, right? Before he could finish his thought, he heard a faint buzzing sound. It sounded like a bee flapping its wings, carrying a faint rhythm. The source of the voice was none other than Luonan. Only now did Lian Yu discover that although Luonan was lying on the ground, his posture was a bit different from the others. He rested his chin on the ground and looked straight ahead. His lips moved slightly and the strange sound came from them. It looked like a wasp with a broken wing struggling on the ground. Could it be that this fellow had gone mad? Lian Yu shuddered and secretly clenched her teeth. She cursed a certain someone who was hundreds of kilometers away. Xie Junping, you bastard, just what kind of people do you know? Xie Junping certainly wouldn't reply, but the military quickly made a judgment. From the perspective of Lian Yu and the others, the armed mechanical soldiers and military personnel appearing one after the other meant that the matter had certainly gotten out of hand. They didn't know how they would be dealt with. But reality proved that in the eyes of the military, a small conflict caused by a group of temporarily detained youngsters was nothing more than a fart. When all was said and done, the military only assisted the police in managing the case. There was no need to waste energy on this. The final treatment was merely to carry the unconscious Li Xueqing out for treatment. Then they dragged Luonan, who didn't fit in with the others, to lock him up by himself. No one objected to this. Even if they did, it would be meaningless. But Luonan spoke in a low voice as he was being brought out. There's still my notebook. It's coming. It's coming. Lian Yu and the others all stared with wide eyes. They wanted to see how this deeply hidden pervert would reveal his vicious and untamed side. However, the development of the situation made a fool of them once again. The captain didn't get angry. Instead, he indicated for his subordinates to go into the cabin and pick up the notebook. He picked it up and flipped through 2 pages. When he saw the cracked flexible screen, he gave it a few more glances. Then he handed the notebook back to Luonan. Luonan didn't say anything more. He obediently followed the escorting soldier and left. He was quiet and restrained from head to toe, just like the impression he gave others in the beginning. While Lian Yu and the others looked at each other in dismay, Luonan was brought into a solitary confinement room. It wasn't too far from where he was locked up before. Since it was a solitary confinement room, the space was narrow. It was reasonable. There was only a single metal chair placed in the room, and it was fixed to the ground. It would pretty much fill up the rest of the space if it was turned in a circle. This was the place that claustrophobic people were most afraid of, but Luonan didn't care. He sat on the chair and the notebook was naturally placed on his knees. He first wiped away the footprints and dirt on the cover, then he carefully opened it. The metal ring frame of the notebook was already a bit deformed from Li Xueqing's heavy trampling and crushing. The opening and closing tab wasn't too flexible either. But this kind of damage wasn't much compared to the flexible e-ink screen. It was unknown where Li Xueqing got his strength from, but the flexible e-ink screen, which was extremely flexible and tough, had over a dozen fine cracks. Some of them ran through the entire screen. It looked like the flexible e-ink screen would fall apart with just a bit more strength. However, the flexible e-ink screen could still be used even in this way. The screen lit up with a light swipe. Luonan felt a bit relieved. Next, he didn't care about anything else. He directly opened up his most commonly used drawing software. The familiar loading sign lit up and he soon cut into the normal interface. The draft of the burning wraith appeared on the highest level. It looked quite normal. Luonan let out a long breath. He pressed his finger long, wanting to enter the next level interface. But the temperature of his breath didn't even have time to change when the flexible e-ink screen suddenly darkened. It automatically shut down without a trace of light. It was like an ominous black post that had been smeared with ink. Luonan tried many different methods to reboot the screen, but he didn't see any reaction. He began to stare blankly as he faced the pitch-black, shattered screen. The miniature camera in the corner locked onto Luonan's stupefied and stiff face, transmitting it to another cabin on the warship. There, the freshly minted lawyer Zhang Yingying rushed over looking travel-worn. She was currently handing over legal documents to the relevant person in charge of the ship. Right now, she had changed into an old-fashioned ash-black dress suit. Her hair was coiled up in a bun. The only bright color on her body was the gorgeous sapphire blue scarf around her neck. Oh, there was also that pair of slender and long calves. They were directly exposed to the air. Her entire body was flawless, and the texture of her skin appeared even more exquisite under the support of her black velvet high heels. It was as if she was glowing with a jade-colored light. The one who was connected to Zhang Yingying was the transport ship's logistics deputy supervisor. This somewhat stout lieutenant colonel officer had the surname Lu. He had already received a warning beforehand. Even though the mature-dressed female lawyer had a tender face, she looked suspicious no matter how he looked at her. He didn't have any intentions of getting to the bottom of things. Of course, perhaps this had something to do with the reason why his eyes kept glancing downwards. Chapter 13. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Show.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Lieutenant Colonel Lu was a bit frivolous, but he had cultivated a habit of caution from working in logistics for a long time. This caused him to have some misgivings about the situation itself. The others are easy to deal with, but this kid called Luonan is a bit suspicious. He's so young yet he acts so ruthlessly. His reaction after the matter is quite odd. Zhang Yingying replied seriously, "It's a pity that this happened, but I think that this kind of hot-blooded conflict will not affect the judgment of the case itself. Of course, the military is only responsible for temporary custody and will not comment on the matter." Lieutenant Colonel Lu said this for the time being. Soon he revealed a smiling face. According to the orders of the higher-ups, Luonan and his group will have to wait until the investigation of the incident is complete before they can be screened and archived. I estimate that there are at least 8 hours left. We weren't allowed to communicate with the outside world before this. Miss Zhang, you're early. Speaking of which, the officers' activity room on the ship has quite good coffee. Why don't I invite Miss Zhang over to kill some time? Zhang Yingying didn't even blink in the face of such a crude method of picking up girls. She directly refused. That's not necessary. My client looks like he has nothing left to live for. It's better for me to keep an eye on him. Lieutenant Colonel Liu shrugged. It should be the damaged flexible screen. It has a special meaning to him. For example, a birthday present from his father. Zhang Yingying raised her eyebrows. Father's gift? Good idea. Lieutenant Colonel Liu was a bit stupefied. He couldn't match the thought process of the young lawyer in front of him, but in order to achieve his goal, he still revealed a smiling face and flaunted those vague philosophies. Adults need to carefully decide on a reason to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Children, on the other hand, are much more casual. They can be defeated at any time, but they can recover quickly because they are still under the protection of their family. Their father will soon make up for it. When my client was 4 years old, my father abandoned him, patted his butt and disappeared. Love go, small say, Neku, was this another rejection? Lieutenant Colonel Liu felt rather embarrassed for a moment. He retreated with his tail between his legs, but he was also unwilling. Just as he was in a dilemma, he saw Zhang Yingying give him a thumbs up. That's why I have to say, Mr. Lieutenant Colonel, what great intuition. Zhang Yingying hooked her index finger and thumb, and the other 3 fingers cut in the air. Did you know 60 years after the advent of flexible e-ink screen products, there were more than 200 brands and more than 3,000 products in the world? However, the one in my client's hand is not any model on the market. Lieutenant Colonel Liu was confused, but it was good to be able to chat with a beauty. He tried hard to think. It's a private production? That's right. My client's father is a first-rate industrial designer. Before he left his job and went missing, he had outstanding work experience in both the production and creative departments of Quantum Corporation. Making such a gift for my only son is the most appropriate. Lieutenant Colonel Liu made a rough estimate. In other words, it has at least 12 years of history? TSK. But I have to say, it will be very difficult for you to claim a high compensation from the vandals based on this. Zhang Yingying smiled and naturally wouldn't explain any more to Lieutenant Colonel Liu. In fact, when she was in the office, she had already done a more detailed analysis based on the flexible e-ink screen video she had obtained in the morning. Even though Luonan's flexible e-ink screen wasn't a product that could be found on the market, the material used to make it was a must. For example, that ultra-thin panel belonged to the Jellyfish series, which was released in the beginning of the year 2090. This proved that the earliest time Luonan received this gift was in the year 90. In other words, it was very likely that Luonan's father, who had been determined to be missing or even dead, was still maintaining contact with Luonan. Perhaps it was just this little bit. The year 90. The incident with Lu Hong was also in this year. There's also the Quantum Corporation's burners and the Deep Blue platform. It really seems to be very crucial. Zhang Yingying gazed at the silent and stiff big boy on the monitor screen. She suddenly really wanted to know what kind of feeling Luonan would have when he was only 10 years old on a certain day in the year 90 when he received this gift from his father, who was nowhere to be found. Was he reminiscing right now? The monitor screen didn't transmit Luonan's thoughts, but it clearly transmitted his body movements. After sitting silently for a long time, Luonan finally made a new movement. He stood up, closed the broken notebook and placed it on the chair. He himself took a step towards the door. Since the space was narrow, Luonan's body leaned slightly forward at this distance. His forehead stuck to the thick and cold metal door. He maintained this position for a few seconds. During this time, one could see him take a few deep breaths. Up until now, Luonan's movements were very easy to understand. He was doing his best to calm his state of mind. But Luonan's next actions were incomprehensible. On the monitor screen, Luonan moved a bit. He adjusted the distance, but his gaze was always directed towards the metal door. He was focused and serious, as if there was an incomparably exquisite work of art in front of him. A full minute passed before he closed his eyes again. He extended his hand and let his fingertips slide across the surface of the metal door, touching it from one end to the other. This wasn't the end. His fingertips streaked across the corner of the wall, touching the metal plate wall to continue his previous actions. And so Luonan walked round and round within the cramped space. His fingertips carved out continuous incorporeal marks on the metal wall. What's going on? The changes were strange and inexplicable. Lieutenant Colonel Liu was a bit dizzy. Zhang Yingying didn't respond. She just watched with interest. This lawyer was drunk? All right, Lieutenant Colonel Liu felt that this couldn't continue. After all, Luonan was still a minor. If by any chance he were to suffer some sort of stimulation and go crazy from holding it in, then his military career would come to an end. He indicated to his subordinates to prepare for intervention measures. The confinement room had tranquilizer spray equipment. It was prepared to prevent the mental confusion and even self-harm of the confinement personnel. But Luo Nan's footsteps stopped at this time. It was as if nothing had happened before. He picked up the notebook on the chair and sat down as before. He flipped to a blank page in the notebook and took out the electronic pen. He pulled out the sensor pen tip and the back half of the pen turned into a fluorescent pen that could be used to write on paper. Luo Nan's pen tip descended under Lieutenant Colonel Lu's astonished gaze. He drew crisscrossed dark lines on the paper. His pen moved extremely quickly and he was extremely proficient in simple strokes. A rough outline appeared in a few breaths of time. Lieutenant Colonel Lu gestured to the monitor to give a close-up. The outline of the lines on the paper resembled a building. Though it was only a sketch, some of the details such as the sealed fence, thick walls, narrow windows, and so on were put together to give people a strong hint. This was a prison. It was just that there was a kind of unnatural misalignment in the overall configuration. It was as if there was a kind of power that intervened between the intangible and the tangible, distorting this building. Lieutenant Colonel Lu only half understood what he was looking at. He heard a slight sound from his side at this time. He turned his head to look and saw Zhang Yingying's eyes focused on the monitor screen. The tips of her feet subconsciously tapped the floor lightly. Her expression was unprecedentedly focused. Oh, perhaps there wouldn't even be a reaction if he extended his hand to touch the young lawyer's pert, but right now? Chapter 14. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Shoan.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Luo Nan didn't know that someone was paying close attention to his every move. Even if he knew, he wouldn't have the extra mental energy to pay attention to it. His condition was very bad. Hunger, pain, numbness and hallucinations. These negative elements that originally existed only increased as time passed, not decreased. Moreover, they gradually converged and turned into a corrosive poisonous fire, driven by some invisible force, drifting around his internal organs, limbs and bones. The so-called incorporeal power was none other than the specter that Luo Nan had discovered through his visualization. The specter of today no longer had the mass of a mosquito. It controlled poisonous flames to flow within the depths of Luo Nan's flesh and blood. It constantly devoured essence and energy, growing and strengthening, and it continued to exert more and more interference on Luo Nan. It formed an effect similar to a blockade. Every time Luo Nan tried to calm his heart and clear his thoughts, enter a meditative state and study the source of the specter in detail, intense disturbances would come howling from the plane of his body and mind, blasting him out. If things were to continue like this, Luo Nan would sooner or later be exhausted to death by the specter if he were to enter the fixed space and suffer the backlash of failure. Wraith had been trying to stir up Luo Nan's emotions. It was just like his conflict with Li Xueqing. Luo Nan had used a fatal psychological suggestion to nearly kill Li Xueqing. His ears clearly reverberated with the faintly discernible laughter of the specter. He was just a little bit away from breaking the string of reason. Luo Nan also remembered the moment his palm pressed against Li Xueqing's throat. Li Xueqing's fear and despair melted within his flesh and blood, converging into a surging wave of heat that rushed in. However, it was destined to be a turbid flow. Not only could it not be used by him, but it even swept away some of his essence chi. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, but it was not hard to imagine where it went. The specter used this method to rapidly grow and strengthen. It squeezed Luo Nan's living space step by step. Naturally, Luo Nan was in a bad mood right now. But if one looked closely, this feeling was mostly a bad experience of old memories being stirred up to the point where the dregs floated up. He was very dissatisfied. Just now, because of the laptop, because of the flexible e-ink screen, he was so angry. This shouldn't have happened. The flexible e-ink screen had been with him for 5 years, and he was used to forgetting everything except its actual functions. But where did that ruthlessness and impulse come from? After that, how did his absent-minded state of mind surge out? Was it because his flesh and blood contained a certain person's genes? That coward. The irony was that the active interference of the specter gave Luo Nan a very good explanation, so much so that he actually felt a bit of subtle relief. Attributing everything to ghosts, that made things much simpler. The specter's blockading interference had indeed caused a lot of trouble. But why did he have to stubbornly smash his head until it bled? Luo Nan entered the fixed space in hopes of drawing support from that state to further understand the specter. He wanted to make contact with it, capture it and exterminate it. Ghost's obstruction and interference proved that his train of thought was correct. From Luonan's point of view, the one with a one-track mind should be Wraith. In order to understand something, one didn't necessarily have to go through the fixed state. Luonan had a more direct method, a pen and a piece of paper. Over the years he had collected character materials, described the surrounding scenery, and sketched countless times on the spot to capture the characteristics of others. His writing might not have been methodical, but he had long trained his acumen to be first-rate. Now, all he needed to do was to create a special, self-portrait. Lines flowed down from the tip of the pen, piling up layer upon layer and intertwining with each other. His mind was neither close nor distant. He was focused and relaxed, fluid and agile. There was actually a tendency to go out of control. In a certain sense, hand drawing was freer than visualization. The visualization diagram seemed to come out of thin air, but it was actually very strict. It had to maintain a certain synchronization with one's body and mind. It couldn't be increased or decreased at will. But a sketch drawn on a piece of white paper was different. It came from reality, yet it could be separated from reality. It could be used to describe certain thoughts and concepts through virtual, fantasy, and symbolic brushwork, completely liberating one's inspiration. Back in the day, his grandfather was able to use hand-drawn diagrams to express the marvels of formatting theory. Today, Luonan could use similar methods to describe and explain the changes that occurred to his body. This change could even be deduced on paper. It was a step ahead, forming a pre-made draft for a great work of art. Therefore, Luonan drew a prison that didn't exist in reality to symbolize the most prominent idea in his mind. This was the first time Luonan had been imprisoned in his entire life. It was a novel experience and he naturally linked it to the first sentence of the 16 words mantra. My heart is like a prison. Luonan believed that the 16 words mantra was certainly some sort of interpretation of formatting theory from his grandfather. The words prison, furnace, mirror, nation, and so on were even direct descriptions of the level of formatting. And according to his deduction of the sequence, the format of prison might be an advancement of container. Therefore he used the cold and cramped confinement room as a reference. He used the free and smooth edge of his brush to gather the faintly discernible inspiration. He even used the indescribably wonderful energy to construct a marvelous building that belonged solely to him on paper. Of course, he knew that the structure of the prison he drew was mostly fantasy. He might not be able to use it on the formatting, but as long as he had the clue of inspiration it was enough. As for the distorted picture, it was easier to explain. This was because the picture reflected reality. The power that distorted the building came from within the building. The incorporeal and shadowless specter was the instigator of all this. He couldn't see the specter, but he could indirectly sense its existence through the distorted picture. The more elements appeared under the brush, the closer the self-portrait was to reality. At this very moment, the tip of Luonan's brush and his thoughts merged into one. They were indistinguishable from each other. It was as if there was no space between them. The imaginary world of nothingness was like a picture scroll that unfolded before Luonan once more. The outline of a tetrahedron, its inscribed sphere, and its circumscribed sphere appeared clearly. It overlapped with the prison on the paper to form a marvelous picture. It didn't matter if he couldn't enter the fixed space. He could reproduce the fixed space here. In fact, the reproduction of the fixed space proved that Luonan's state of mind had already eliminated the interference of external forces. The specter's movements were meaningless. The tip of Luonan's brush did not stop. His state of mind had already returned to the fixed space. The specter, who had been interfering and destroying all this time, was caught off guard. It finally revealed its strange appearance. Other colors seeped into the originally empty darkness outside the visualized diagram. It was a kind of oppressive dark red. It was like a struggling flame within the ashes that had yet to be extinguished. It seeped and blended with the darkness to form a somewhat fuzzy silhouette together. This thing swam within the darkness, sticking to the visualized diagram in an attempt to penetrate inside. And it had already penetrated quite a bit. If it were someone else, they would need to spend some time to find the boundaries of this monster. But Luonan recognized its appearance with a single glance, the burning wraith. It was precisely this wraith that was faintly discernible during the earthquake in the R&D district. It howled and nearly took Luonan's life. Afterwards, it concealed itself into nothingness, making it hard to trace. Luonan even left its image on the drawing software. If he hadn't encountered his true fate, Luonan would already be at school right now. He would be looking up information, striving to find the slightest trace of the wraith. How could he have imagined that this fellow would actually be in such a state, wandering within his consciousness, fusing with his flesh and blood? Luonan didn't stop writing, but his lips curved into a light smile. Hey, you're smiling. You're smiling. Lieutenant Colonel Lu cried out involuntarily. Then he felt extreme shame. He felt that he must have been infected by Luonan for him to make such a fuss over nothing. Zhang Yingying was also very curious about Luonan's current state of mind. Unfortunately, the monitoring screen was destined to be unable to detect Luonan's thoughts. On the other hand, a beep rang out from the monitoring room. The door opened and someone walked in with large strides. Zhang Yingying looked back with curiosity. She saw that the person was wearing a well-ironed sky blue uniform. He didn't wear a military rank. He was clearly out of place in the room filled with deep space gray aerospace army uniforms. Lieutenant Colonel Lu turned his head to look at the person. His brows slightly furrowed, but he quickly squeezed out a smile. He walked a step forward and spoke with a chuckle. Assistant Yen, how's the search going? Chapter 15. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Show.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Assistant Yin didn't immediately respond to Lieutenant Colonel Lu's greeting. His gaze first swept over Zhang Yingying, pausing for a moment, just in time to meet the latter's gaze. Love, go, small, say, Netco. Assistant Yin was in his early 30s and of medium height. He might not even be as tall as Zhang Yingying in high heels, but his posture was strong and his face was quite handsome. It was just that the corners of his lips were habitually pursed, and his expression was cold and solemn. He did not look like someone who was easy to talk to. What left the deepest impression was his eyes. His pupils were slightly dark red, and a similar color seeped out from the edges of his eyes, especially at the corners of his eyes, where the protruding veins and veins near his temples were intertwined. It was a rather uncomfortable feeling. Lieutenant Colonel Lu saw that the two of them were sizing each other up, but he pretended that he didn't know and didn't help to introduce them. Assistant Yen, what can I do for you? According to the command center's suggestion, a batch of detection equipment has been transferred from my company to be used to screen the suspects temporarily detained on the ship. Assistant Yan's face was expressionless as he directly operated his wristband. He indicated to Lieutenant Colonel Lu and quickly passed the authorization verification. Detection equipment? Lieutenant Colonel Lu asked curiously, is the search over? Not yet, but the precision of the equipment is quite high, and the installation and debugging will take some time. Understood, understood. Lieutenant Colonel Lu felt a bit regretful. Since it was equipment acceptance, as a supervisor he had to be present. That was the end of his friendly interaction with the young female lawyer. He signaled Assistant Yen to wait for a moment and turned to Zhang Yingying with a smile. Miss Zhang, shall we stop here first? It's still early, so I'll arrange a cabin for you to rest first. I'll arrange for someone to send the information to you later. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Zhang Yingying knew that it was no longer suitable for her to stay in the monitoring center alone, so she took the initiative to shake Lieutenant Colonel Lu's hand and bid her farewell. When she passed by Assistant Yen, Zhang Yingying gave him a friendly smile. She narrowed her eyes and activated the automatic camera function of her contact lenses, saving a photo of the person's face. The corners of Assistant Yan's lips twitched. He didn't know if that was considered a response. His line of sight did not land on Zhang Yingying either. Judging from the angle, he was looking at the surveillance footage in the room. Zhang Yingying glanced back the instant she walked out the door. Lieutenant Colonel Lu could be considered quite cautious. He didn't want to give others a handle. He had long since indicated to his subordinates to switch out Luonan's close-up. Luonan's figure had already disappeared into a dozen or so similar images on the monitor screen. He couldn't be considered too eye-catching. But Zhang Yingying had a strong feeling. The focus of this Assistant Yan's gaze was aimed at Luonan, and it had been a long time since he moved. Walking in the corridor inside the warship, Zhang Yingying entered the image she had just taken into the database and confirmed the search criteria. Judging from the uniform, it's Sky Blue Security, a professional security company under Quantum Corporation. They're able to communicate directly with the military, so their position should be high up. And those eyes? A few seconds later, a warning sounded. Information listed as secret. You do not have sufficient authority. Zhang Yingying wasn't particularly surprised. She pursed her lips and switched to another channel. Not long after, he took out a simple personal file. The reason why he said it was simple was that there was still a considerable portion that had been blocked. However, she could already verify a portion of her conjecture from the current information. The electronic photo on top of the file was precisely Assistant Yan's appearance. He was just younger by 7 or 8 years, and he was currently revealing a spirited smile. Yan Yonghua, former lecturer of Acumen College. He left his post of his own accord in 90. His father, former professor of Acumen College, Yan Hong. Okay then. Enemies really do meet on a narrow road. Speaking of which, did he recognize me in the end? Zhang Yingying thought back to the conversation she had with Xie Junping before she boarded the warship. She had no choice but to make an amendment. This giant ship of Quantum Corporation doesn't care about little ants, but the spider and whatnot on it might not. This seemed to be a very troublesome choice. Give it up? Luo Nan's thoughts stirred and the marvelous scene that appeared beneath the tip of his pen flowed within his mind. It's really cool. Luo Nan, who was very cool, was still drawing with his pen. Even though he had already entered the fixed space, locked onto the source of interference and confirmed the true identity of the specter, he didn't have any intentions of stopping. The feeling of the pen and mind merging into one was truly very marvelous. The burning wraith was an inconceivable existence. Luo Nan didn't know how to categorize it and determine its nature. Even though he had entered the fixed space, he didn't have too many clues as to how to deal with it. But when he held the luster pen in his hand and allowed the lines to flow from the tip of the pen, all the problems were no longer problems. The material and the mental, the real and the illusory, the present and the future. Multiple dimensions interweaved together to depict the same goal from multiple angles. His inspiration would never dry up no matter what. The distorted sketch of the prison building that was filled with symbolism revealed more and more clear conceptual clues. Luo Nan's lips unconsciously opened and closed slightly. He silently recited the mnemonic chant that he had long since become familiar with. He only chose the first 4 words, "My heart's a prison." He silently recited it without a sound, but the intent that carried through it had never been as condensed as it was now. It broke through the boundary between the real and the illusory to attack the plane of the visualization. It was as if it had transformed into an iron hammer that smashed heavily onto the visualization diagram. It was like the ringing of a bell. It was like the striking of a chime. Countless silver threads were extracted from the diagram amidst the fine vibrations. They split apart to randomly construct countless flickering structures. And they clearly had a close relationship with the prison building in the notebook. Some were clear and proper. Some were distorted and blurry. There was also an enormous difference in their images. There were tightly woven fences inside. There was a sealed iron cage. There were leaping arcs of electricity. There was a malevolent beam gun. In short, each and every one of them was a symbol of violence and coercion. They were the embodiment of the details of the prison drawing. Due to the leaping of consciousness and the haphazard brushwork, the majority of the structures were only superficial. They didn't conform to the principles of construction at all. The time that they existed was extremely short. But every time the intertwining and shattering structure of silver threads swept past, the burning wraith that had already penetrated into the inner layer of the visualization diagram acted as if it was facing a great enemy. It moved endlessly in defense, cutting quite a sorry figure. The burning wraith also wanted to carry out interference and destruction. But the problem was that the process that unfolded in multiple dimensions at the same time had already completely exceeded the scope of its control. Luo Nan didn't understand why the burning wraith that was over 100 meters tall had gone wrong when it howled at the sky. It was actually so unbearable. But he wouldn't stop. The chanting never stopped. The visualization never stopped. The tip of the brush never stopped. Gradually, Luo Nan gave up on injecting the inspiration of the details into the sketch. Instead, he began to do subtraction. He revolved around the increasingly clear conceptual clues and strengthened them. Within the visualization diagram, those leaping and combining silver threads seemed to respond to the intense and pure intent of his mind. Hundreds and thousands of flashy but impractical constructions collapsed with a rumble, revealing the simple and pure composition of the tetrahedron once again. At the center of the diagram, at the center of the inscribed sphere, there was a crashing sound coming from the center of the sphere. It was as if the heart was trembling. The burning wraith actually lost the courage to linger any longer when faced with this change. Within the darkness, the light of the flames curled up and separated from the visualization diagram. It transformed into a streak of red light that pierced through the sky and left. This was the visualization plane. Where could it go? Before this thought could finish, the world of nothingness shook once more. The red light seemed to penetrate through an incorporeal membrane. After a slight pause, it increased its speed and pierced through the sky. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly went into a daze the instant the membrane was penetrated. An ice-cold metal wall appeared in his field of vision. A notebook was placed on his lap and he was drawing with his pen. Chapter 16. Genius in 1 second. Remember Love Go? Talk Net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Out-of-body state? Right now Luo Nan was like watching a supernatural movie. But before he had the time to experience the pros and cons, the burning wraith's red glow had already penetrated through the wall in the blink of an eye, disappearing without a trace. Oh, saying disappearing wasn't accurate. This was because there was still an indescribable, yet clearly distinguishable sensation that marked the burning wraith's position in the bottom of his heart. Luo Nan knew the reason. This was because the drawing under his pen was a self-portrait in name. In reality, it depicted a considerable range of mental and physical states. Naturally, this included the burning wraith. Oh, the unnatural distortion on the sketch of the prison building was it? Right now Luo Nan's visualization and drawing had already merged into one. It was difficult for each other. Since he had left an imprint on the sketch, how was it possible for him to not leave a trace in his mind? No matter where the burning wraith fled to, it still appeared clearly on Luo Nan's drawing and within his mind at this moment. And because of the burning wraith's abrupt escape, the dynamic change of the interference power stimulated Luo Nan's inspiration once again. His main body actually hadn't stopped writing under this inexplicable out-of-body state. Even though the sketch in his notebook couldn't contain any more details, his inspiration had already gushed out. It was unstoppable. The tip of his pen was practically piercing through the paper. It drew intertwined lines on the only empty space on the outside of the sketch. The constantly strengthening conceptual clues finally buzzed into shape under the casting of inspiration. It was just like, crash. On the visualization plane, a thick, heavy crow chain appeared like a predatory python amidst the trembling sound. It appeared from the center of the visualization diagram, exploding out with its long body. The incorporeal membrane that had just been pierced was torn apart once more. The crow chain then broke through the void and entered reality. It followed the direction the burning wraith fled in, breaking through the air. Luo Nan didn't know how long the chain was. The front half had already entered the void, but the center of the sphere still hadn't been pulled to its limit. Perhaps length had no meaning on this plane? In a split second, Luo Nan heard a sharp hiss. The crow chain, including his mind, made contact with the scorching hot and irritable burning wraith in this instant. The chains trembled and moved even faster, actually forcefully piercing through the other party. Immediately after, countless silver threads burst forth, shuttling back and forth, interlocking with each other, firmly locking the burning wraith in place. Caught it? But Luo Nan was only delayed by 1,000th of a second. Before he could taste the taste of victory, an enormous pulling force passed through the long chain and fiercely acted upon his body. The burning wraith also didn't know where it got its strength from, but it was like a wild boar that had gone berserk. Disregarding everything, it carried the chains and madly leapt forward. Luo Nan was unable to control the explosive charge of the specter. Even his body was affected by some sort of strange and mysterious power. He just felt his entire body lighten, and the intersecting images of reality and visualization rapidly changed. The environment of the confinement room was replaced by the various cabins, corridors, and mechanical structures of the ship. This time, it really was an out-of-body experience. Moreover, it was forcibly dragged out of his body by the berserk burning wraith through the wall. What was this? The physical laws of the soul? At first, Luo Nan was still thinking whether or not there were people who could see this unscientific scene. But soon he was certain that the soldiers, officers, and AI machines that came and went on the warship were completely unaware of the chase that was happening above their heads. The tightly guarded transport ship had been completely transformed into an undefended racecourse. At least it was like this for now. It must be said that this was quite a novel experience. Luo Nan also tried to observe his current state of existence. He worked hard for a long time before coming to a preliminary conclusion. In his soul state, his form was very close to that of the burning wraith. It was just that he didn't have that oppressive dark red fiery glow. He was more like a shadow of nothingness. Luo Nan still wanted to carefully experience it for a bit. But after a short period of muddle-headedness, he sensed a chill that rapidly increased in intensity. It was simply like he was raging through a world of ice and snow with his naked body. The cruel cold wind sliced at his body like blades. The incorporeal cold wind was simply unavoidable. The incorporeal soul didn't have the effect of splattering blood in all directions, but the intense feeling of pain was real and real. It was very clear that the situation was tilting in a dangerous direction. And it was clearly closely related to the hasty and passive out-of-body experience. Luonan's first thought was to hurry and return to his main body. But right now his mind and the chains coexisted. They were all bound to the burning wraith. He was completely muddle-headed as to how to unbind and how to break free. The more muddle-headed he was, the more he needed to do something. Luonan did 3 things in this life-threatening moment. First, he made a comparison. Which was more painful, the cold wind cutting the soul or the psychotropic drug composition cutting the nerves? Conclusion: there seemed to be no difference. Second, he made a confirmation. In the end, was there still a connection between the soul and the main body? Conclusion: the main body was in quite a bit of pain over there. Third, he raised a question. Since there was a connection between the soul and the main body, where was the connection? Conclusion: I don't know anything else, but it certainly existed on the visualization plane and the draft drawing, even though it was a bit abstract. The first conclusion strengthened his conviction. The second structure gave him a clear direction. The third conclusion gave him a method. At this very moment, his firm conviction transformed into another wave of chanting sounds. The first 4 words rumbled within the visualization plane and within the soul. My heart's a prison. The visualization plane still blended together with the draft drawing. Between reality and illusion, the messy yet distinct layers of the prison building seemed to be truly constructed. It was piled up layer by layer, covering the limits of Luonan's range of perception like a dark cloud. The out-of-body soul appeared to be far away from the main body, but it was actually still within the range of the prison building. The burning wraith was the same. The heavily chained crow shuttled back and forth within this seemingly illusory building, transforming into beams, pillars, thick walls, prisons, torture tools. And it was also at this moment that Luonan truly understood the essence of the heavily chained crow. No matter what kind of prison it was the embodiment of coercive rules. Coercive power was certainly the number 1 priority. There must be the power of punishment when facing a disobedient prisoner. The burning wraith appeared to be fleeing far away, but as long as it didn't truly throw off the shackles of the chains, it would inevitably suffer a merciless suppression. The heavily chained crow hummed in an instant, carrying out Luonan's will. The power stored deep within it was finally displayed. As the result of the accumulation of ideas and inspiration, every strand of the heavily chained crow divided into silver strands. Every chain constructed was linked to Luonan's mind. This movement was tantamount to piercing the bound burning wraith from the inside to the outside. It was wrapped and twisted. It was so much so that it was directly sliced and analyzed. A large amount of information was fed back. It was too late to sort through in a short time. The burning wraith hissed in pain. There were no sound waves, but there were seemingly substantial psychic waves that spread to the surroundings. It seemed that this painful emotion was far too intense. The wall lights in the long corridor of the warship suddenly dimmed. In the next moment, the entire row of red warning lights lit up. A tangible and intangible warning sound penetrated through the entire space of the warship. Warning. Warning. Invasion of mutants. I repeat. Invasion of mutants. Level 3 mutant state. Darkside life form has appeared. All conventional armed personnel enter combat positions. Prepare tranquilizers. Enter standby state of AI. Activating the deep blue platform. The burners have entered a state of emergency. Chapter 17. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? The web provides you with wonderful novels to read. In a short few seconds, a dark red alarm light spread a tense and serious atmosphere to every corner of the transport ship. Although this sort of situation was rare for the military, there were always rules to follow. It was enough as long as the various departments and systems obeyed orders. But the problem was that there weren't only soldiers on the transport ship. The moment the alarm rang out, the engineers of Quantum Corporation in Area C who were setting up the site and debugging the equipment were all dumbfounded. They stopped what they were doing and looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The supervisor present, Lieutenant Colonel Liu, had the highest military rank and was also quite experienced. He immediately said, "All non-combat personnel cease work and await further instructions." Lieutenant Colonel Liu was also busy contacting his superiors to confirm the situation. It wasn't easy to get clear instructions. He raised his head to look for the person in charge of Quantum Corporation, but the corner of his eye twitched. As the head of security, Liang Yongbo was sitting at the edge of the construction site. He didn't even raise his head as he fiddled with his wristband, ignoring the changes in the outside world. "They're bragging about how calm you are." Lieutenant Colonel Liu had always disliked this sort of arrogant and conceited fellow. He immediately straightened his face and walked over with large strides. Just as he was about to speak, a swift and fierce man wearing a sky blue security uniform rushed in front of him and asked Yen Yongbo for instructions. "Captain, we've entered a state of emergency. Do you want to warm it up?" "Warm it up? Oh, Black." Liang Yongbo still didn't raise his head as he calmly said, "You're wearing an exoskeleton armor and leaping around the warship. Have you ever thought about the feelings of the military? You haven't, right? If you haven't, then ask Lieutenant Colonel Liu." Lieutenant Colonel Liu had just walked over when he was stopped by these words. His imposing manner weakened. It was at this moment that Liang Yongbo raised his head to look at him. "Lieutenant Colonel Liu, what do you think?" The corner of Lieutenant Colonel Liu's eye twitched twice. In the end, he still forcefully held back his anger and forced himself to speak. "Command, the invasion of the dark side or life forms has a high probability of being related to the incident at the Research and Development District. Quantum Corporation's burners will participate in the pursuit and will temporarily be assigned to the Special Forces Squad 7. This is the Communications Identification Code." Liang Yongbo received the relevant data and nodded. "Very well then, I accept the order. But Lieutenant Colonel Liu, I suspect this accident has something to do with the people detained on the warship. I hope the military can increase their surveillance efforts to avoid any unexpected situations. F***ck your grandpa." Lieutenant Colonel Liu finally flew into a rage when a problem was pointed out in the matter he was in charge of. He couldn't be bothered to say anything more, so he turned around and left with a dark expression. Liang Yongbo didn't say much. He stood up and led Blackie in another direction. On the way he sent a set of data to Blackie. "If that idiot wants to come, he'll need some time to vent his anger. There won't be any changes to the defense. Wait for an opportunity to move to Area A2. Make a big move. If you meet this person, create some accidents." The data was projected on Blackie's retina, showing the handsome and quiet face of a young man. Love go, small sake neck. Old Black was expressionless. He only nodded slightly, engraving that young face deep in his heart. The alarms and warning lights did not stop. Under the flickering dark red light, the prison building that was built between reality and illusion began to collapse after a brief moment of glory. Soon, it turned into ruins and returned to nothingness. After all, Luonan hadn't truly constructed a reasonable structure yet. There were many overly casual future conceptions involved within. Being able to temporarily appear for a period of time was already a pretty decent confirmation. Of course, the most important thing was that the burning wraith was already completely unable to stir up a storm. Walala. Walala. The heavily chained crow continued to retreat. No matter how much the burning wraith struggled, the chains that bound its body continued to dissect, slice and analyze. The layers of the binding force gradually pointed towards the core essence. A layer of faint bloody light could be seen clearly flowing on the dark base of the chains. The bloody light changed against the flow, drawing back a marvelous heat. It flowed without end. This was the energy that came from the burning wraith. The accumulation of information analysis began to display its effect. A portion of the burning wraith's energy circulation mechanism was cracked. The chains drew back in time, giving Luonan support while weakening the burning wraith's strength. Such an outcome was truly timely for Luonan, who had left his body in a hurry. The energy poured into Luonan's soul. It was like a mouthful of hot soup in a state of extreme hunger. It was like a thick layer of clothing wrapped around one's body in the middle of winter. The results were immediate. The cold wind blades were immediately blocked outside. Within the space of 2 to 3 breaths, even Luonan's main body had the corresponding feedback. The state of hunger that was nearing its limit was somewhat alleviated. The situation was always like this. The burning wraith that had lost a large amount of blood had already turned from a wild boar that ran around randomly into a sled dog that wasn't very obedient. Then, it irreversibly transformed into a dead dog. Luonan saw the dead dog a few seconds later. The burning wraith was indeed well behaved. It floated in the air sickly. There weren't too many changes to its outer appearance. Even if there were changes, it wouldn't be seen. Only the outer layer of flames had clearly dimmed quite a bit. But there was something very eye-catching. Behind this toy, let's just call it behind for the time being. It dragged a very long tail. The heavily chained crow continued to control, slice, and analyze the burning wraith without end. And it seemed that this would continue for a very long period of time. Even though Luonan was in his soul state, he still let out a long breath out of habit. He had finally resolved this inexplicable trouble. He could finally put his energy back on the plane of reality. Luonan naturally paid attention to the alarm that resonated throughout the entire ship. Let's not talk about anything else. The terrible negative term mutant was already enough to explain a lot of things. But what was a dark side of life form? Luonan searched his memories, but there were no results. A clear change had already occurred in the surrounding situation at this time. There wasn't a shadow of a single person within the long internal corridor. But long and narrow cracks had opened up on the walls and floor of the corridor at an unknown time. Pale white smoke could be seen emitting from the cracks, quickly pervading the entire corridor. At the end of the corridor, the muffled sound of footsteps could be heard. 3 majestic exoskeleton armors formed a battle formation. They advanced forward step by step within the misty smoke. Aside from the smoke, the corridor was completely empty. There wasn't a single thing to hide in. The people on the other side looked as if they were facing a great enemy. It was as if there was an incorporeal monster that could hunt and kill at any time. Luonan suddenly had a very marvelous feeling when he witnessed this scene. Incorporeal? Incorporeal? Why does it seem like this group of people have come to deal with me? The smoke within the corridor grew thicker and thicker. Luonan's mind stirred slightly. He didn't engage in the galloping horse style of charging forward like a violent hurricane. Instead, he pulled the half-dead burning wraith and circled around the corridor. He was like a true specter as he passed through the metal wall and entered the adjacent cabin. Then he charged forward all the way towards the direction of the main body. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.